Uh, hey, folks. Hello, hello. Today, you are here, and we're going to talk about myths and misconceptions of the D.B. Cooper case. I will give some time for everybody to join. Looks like we're going to have a good crowd tonight. I think that people like this topic because it's going to be a pretty informative topic. This is obviously, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about this case, and one of the main reasons for being that way is that for so long, we did not have the FBI files. We did not have the actual documents that we needed to be able to verify many of the wild claims that people would make. It's really twofold. We didn't have the FBI. Well, there's multiple reasons why there's so many myths and misconceptions. And I guess that the way to explain it is that, for one thing, we didn't have access to the FBI files, which was a detriment. Number two would be that this was an active investigation. So anything you get from the FBI is going to be half-truths, things that they want the public to know, and things that they don't want the public to know aren't going to be said. And number three, the primary witnesses pretty much clammed up for the first, 40 years, I would say, of the case. They had sporadic interviews every now and then. Some of them were interviewed for Richard Tusaw's book, but they did not give much. So we've got the FBI not telling us everything. We've got no access to the case files, and we don't have the witnesses participating much. So really what people had to go off of were real rumors and secondhand information in newspapers. And, you've got, with newspapers, you have these retellings that happen over and over again. Every 10 years, every year, every anniversary, you'd have the AP rewriting an article. So we've got just all these things happening, like Cooper having 2 drinks instead of 1. I can date that accurately to a 1981 article where some writer for the AP messed that up. And because the AP is so ubiquitous and so easy to find, that became a thing, that Cooper had 2 drinks, all from this one article that was mistaken. So that's kind of where we are with these myths. So I think everybody's in here now. So let's see, what we're going to do tonight really is, Chris and I have come up with a list of, 40 myths or misconceptions, and we're just kind of going to go through with them really in chronological order of the hijacking. And that's what we're going to be doing. So
I think it's actually 25 or 30. I don't want to scare people off with 40 because they're thinking, good God.
Well, it's a lot.
Yeah, yes. It's a lot, and we may not get to them all. I think some of these are pretty easily explained, I don't think it'll take long to discuss. I don't think we're going to have to spend 10 minutes discussing each one. Right,
and the one with the drinks actually is not on our list. And Rose is asking, she says 2 drinks. I thought it was only 1. That's right. That it was only 1 drink, a bourbon and 7, and he spilled it promptly. And I speculate that he had already drank. He had downed it pretty quick, because I think that all he spilled, if he spilled it, well, we know he spilled it because Bill Mitchell said he spilled it, but I would speculate that he only spilled out the ice, probably because he was obviously able to clean it up himself, because Florence never mentioned cleaning up his drink for him. So,
and I can't imagine that those, I think those are plastic cups, right? Those were, we're not thinking those big, heavy, highball glasses.
No, it was a plastic cup.
Little plastic cup. Certainly they're not going to overserve anybody on a flight. So no. I don't think it was much to begin with. And you're probably right. He probably had about half of it gone by the time
he probably just spilled the ice. If he was able to clean it up himself without Florence knowing about it, then it's probably just the ice there. So let's see. To start out with, let's say, all right, so we're just going to go through these. Let's see. All right. Well, obviously, the first big one is that Cooper gave his name to the agent as DB.
Right, which not true. And there, he gave his name as Cooper, Dan Cooper. That was how he, according to Dennis Lindsay, or Lisney, excuse me, because I always get that name wrong.
Yeah.
According to the ticket agent, when Cooper approached him, he was asked for his name, and the way that Cooper gave his name was Cooper, Dan Cooper, much like Bond, James Bond. And but at no point did the person of Dan Cooper ever identify himself as DB. And as has been well documented recently, that was basically a media creation, a mistake of the media. Now, along those lines, have heard multiple stories as to exactly how that media mistake was made. And the one that sticks in my mind, and I'm going to allow you to debunk it, is two media members, either a reporter or a stringer or someone, were talking on the phone, and they said, "What is the name of the hijacker?" And they said D. Cooper, and the person said B. Cooper, and the other person said yes. So it was kind of a confusion there as D and B, and it ended up being both. So Ryan, you want to speak to the validity of that particular theory scenario?
Yeah, really what happened there is that I forget I think the name was, I believe the guy's name, let me pull this up. Actually, I should have had that up already. I believe the guy's name was, where is it? I've got it right here. Pardon me, folks. Yeah, basically what happened was there was a reporter for the UPI. His name was Clyde Jabin, and he was really responsible for this. And wait, actually, I'm wrong here. I'm looking at my own. I'm reading my own book here. I'm because I have a piece on this, but I wrote this so long ago that I'm having. That's right. So Clyde Jabin was a reporter for the UPI. That's United Press International, and he shared an office with James Long, who was a writer for the Oregon Journal. They had all these journalists kind of shared offices, and sometimes they would snoop around and see what the other person was writing, and UPI might steal it, things like that. And what happened was that James Long was overhearing a Oregon State Police scanner, and they were going to go check out a guy who went by the name DB Cooper sometimes. And this guy was a young guy. He was a Vietnam veteran. His name was Daniel Barry Cooper. And he had been arrested a few times for stuff when he'd come back from Vietnam, I guess, a little anxious, and he'd been arrested. And his name was Daniel Barry Cooper. And so he went by DB Cooper. So Long had written down somewhere, overhearing this police scanner, listening in, DB Cooper or Daniel Barry Cooper. And so Clyde Jabin, the reporter for the UPI, was snooping around and saw that and just fired that out that night. And so that became how it was. It became DB Cooper. And thankfully so. I mean, Dan Cooper doesn't sound as cool. And as somebody mentioned in the chat, Walter Cronkite says D.A. Cooper.
Right.
In that famous clip.
Yeah. So no, DB is a media, I won't say invention. It was an error done on the part of the media that just entered the
zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist, right? And frankly, yes, DB is a much cooler name than Dan. Dan, obviously, Dan Cooper is pretty.
And honestly,
name.
We have the FBI. We have in the FBI files. They basically say, "Look, we can take advantage of this because if we don't publicize that it was Dan Cooper, we can debunk people easily that way."
Yeah, it was probably a good holdback.
Yeah, it was a nice method to get rid of cranks and kooks and false confessors.
Right. So no, myth busted. Cooper did not give his name as DB. He gave it as Dan.
I think that seems like really most people know that. But although I don't know, I guess most people who are put any effort into the case will know that.
People who are brand new to the case probably, because as I developed this list and ran it by you, there were things in here that when I was new to the case assumed were true. So and took me a while to kind of realize, no, so that's why we're doing this, man, is right. We want, this is for people who are new to the case, interested in the case, and have heard these things repeated on less reputable, places. And we just want to end the foolishness on April Fool's Day.
Yep.
So,
and I will, if anybody has myths of their own that we're not going to get to, I might see them in the comments. Like I see a comment right now about, myth that Cooper wore a hairpiece. No, the stewardesses were asked about. In fact, two of the stewardesses wore wigs. That would be Florence Schaffner and Alice Hancock, and we actually have both of them saying to the FBI, "I wear a wig and I can spot hair pieces." Yeah. And he was not wearing a hairpiece. In fact, because I mean, if you wore a hairpiece, why would you give yourself a bald spot or be receding? Have a receding hairline on a wig? That kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah.
His hair was thin, and I mean, probably a lot like my poor hair, which is thinning as we speak. It's going to fall out even more.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, no, well, yeah. So I'm getting there. All right. So next we've got
Cooper confirmed with the ticket agent that Flight 305 was a Boeing 727. Mm-hmm. And this is one that I have heard repeated again and again and again. Basically, that while he was buying his ticket and conversing with Dennis Linsey, that Cooper asked the ticket agent, "Is this a 727?" To which the ticket agent replied, "Yes, it is."
No.
Thoughts on that, Ryan?
No, that's a dramatization. And I don't know what the word is, but it's added for dramatic effect in the Norjack book that comes from Ralph Himmelbach's Norjack book. His ghostwriter was a guy named Thomas Worcestershire. I don't know how to say his name, but Thomas W. was his name. He was a writer, and that's purely an embellishment. Cooper would have known that was already a 727. The flight schedules, actually, I wish I had one to show, but the flight schedules that you could pick up in any airport said what the plane was going to be.
Yeah,
on the flight schedule. So he didn't need to ask that.
Right. And presumably the myth, like you said, you sourced it from Norjack, but presumably the myth comes from the fact of the idea that Cooper wanted to make sure that he knew that he could jump from that aircraft. But right. As you pointed out, he's probably choosing that flight because he already knows it's a 727. You're not going to buy a ticket and then ask, "Hey, is this the plane where I can jump out the back?"
Yeah, and I should add that the Unsolved Mysteries episode has their Cooper saying, "Is this a 727?" Right. So that was repeated on Unsolved Mysteries. And again, Unsolved Mysteries, as I say, if you've not seen my review of Cooper films, Unsolved Mysteries was highly influenced by Ralph Himmelbach.
Yes, it was.
Highly. And that obviously comes from Norjack, his own book. So now, and again, unless he spoke to Dennis Linsey himself at some point and it just wasn't in there, but Dennis is interviewed on the day of the hijacking and basically gives everything he remembers.
Yeah.
I think that he would have remembered that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I actually read a news article about where they interviewed Dennis, and he says that he asked Cooper, I think, round trip, one way, or there was another option that he gave him. I want to say express. And Cooper said one way. Yeah. But that's from a media newspaper article in which he's interviewed, and he's quoted as saying that. I don't know if that appears in his 302. I can't recall.
No, it does not. Here's a funny aside about that. McNally actually bought a round trip ticket for his ticket. He thought it would be more less conspicuous to buy a round trip ticket. I don't know why, but because people fly one way all the time. But Marty bought a round trip ticket, and years later, because he was bored in prison, he wrote the president of American Airlines and asked for a refund because he never used the return flight that he paid for. So McNally, just being a troll from prison, asked for his money back, asked for a refund on that. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Next we've got Cooper was dressed in all black, including a Homburg hat, which I've never actually heard that he was wearing a hat. Actually, it's mentioned it's one of the things that's in the Rackstraw book. For some reason, the Last American Outlaw, it says that Cooper was wearing a hat. And it's like, no, that's not.
There's no witnesses in any way, shape, or form that even hint at the fact that he was wearing any type of headpiece, headgear, hat. That is completely bogus. He was not wearing a hat at any time during the hijacking, prior to the hijacking. So that's myth busted, wasn't wearing a hat. As far as him wearing all black, this is obviously something that is very persistent in the vortex. This idea that he was wearing all black, a black trench coat or a black raincoat, black pants, black shoes, black jacket, black tie, etc. But that doesn't appear to be the case. He was wearing a black raincoat. He was wearing a black tie. However, his suit has been described as anything between dark brown to russet color. And his shoes, correct me if I'm wrong, were described as brown or not matching the rest of his outfit.
Right.
So, as far as all brown is concerned, if anything, the two articles of clothing that he was wearing that were black were the trench coat, the raincoat, and the tie.
Right.
It doesn't appear as if anything else that he was wearing could be described as fully black.
No, and it's funny is even his hair, even though we'd like to talk about some passengers said his hair was jet black. Tina Mucklow said his hair was dark brown, which is I've always found interesting. And I actually have here Tina Mucklow's description of Cooper on the screen right now. And yeah, it says dark brown suit with a thin black stripe, brown socks, brown ankle length, pebble grain shoes, not tie type shoes. And so I've often shown this image here of my kind of vision of Cooper with this black trench coat thing he was wearing. And really, it's interesting that the witnesses who saw him from a distance basically just remember him wearing black, which makes sense. I mean, if you're wearing a black overcoat, that's really what you're going to focus on.
Well, like Hal Williams, the gate agent, said that what drew his attention to Cooper was that he was dressed in black, and his eyes were always attracted to people dressed in all black when they sat in the terminal or sat at the gate. So certainly he was wearing darker colored clothing, particularly the raincoat. Was it Labisnine who said that he was wearing dark brown with russet colored stripes?
No, that's going to be Robert Gregory. Gregory was the one who said that. Gregory owned his career. He was a paint store guy, and he apparently had a good eye for colors, and so he called his suit russet. Gregory, maybe Gregory is just one of these guys who has an amazing memory. Some people have really, really good recall of physical features, like really good.
Yeah,
because his description is really detailed for a guy who says he only saw the hijacker twice, but he has this really deep. He even talks about the lapels being wide and all this other stuff. But no, Labisniere, though, is the one who, we'll get to him. I think he was drunk on the plane. He has this weird description of Cooper as wearing a sporty vest. It's like, what in the world? It's just bizarre. Anyway, but yeah, so Cooper was wearing a brown suit, according to Tina Mucklow.
Was it Mitchell who said that he thought that there was something about the shoes that did not match the rest of his outfit, that they were either outdated or didn't match in terms of color or style?
Something did not sit right with Bill. Bill basically thought that he saw something peeking out the bottom of Cooper's pants, something that was off-colored to everything else, which has been speculated to be maybe long johns of some sort. Or, honestly, who knows? Marty McNally was wearing blue jeans and a polo under his suit. Now, I don't think that Cooper ditched his suit before jumping, but he may have intended to land on the ground and then change. Right. So we don't know. I mean, maybe he did have something else because, McNally was smart like that. McNally said, I don't want to land on the ground looking like the hijacker, which is smart, honestly. Yeah. So that's thinking ahead. So maybe Cooper was wearing something under his.
Now, we forgot about one thing, that another article of his that was black, and that's the sunglasses.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we both have our sunglasses here. Yes.
So I recently came across these. These are vintage sunglasses from the time period.
Yep.
They are virtually wraparound, as you can see. They have a little bit of a green tint to them. And they are very secure on my face. They are not.
Oh yeah,
moving
they're not going
around.
anywhere. I
Um,
try to explain this to people. I'm like, you could probably jump out of a plane with these on, and I don't think they would
yeah,
come off.
yeah.
I really don't think so.
But these, I think, if I had to guess, I think these are likely the sunglasses that he was wearing on the plane, or something extraordinarily similar.
Very similar. Yeah, they look very, very similar. And like I said, they even have this, for me, this greenish tint. And now Chris's eyes might be different than mine, but this, I can see completely fine. Like I can see there is no, it's a little dimmer, but I could definitely.
These are very dark. For
I could
me,
do
these are
anything.
very, very dark.
Well, yours are dark. Mine are not.
And
I can do anything.
I'm sitting in a room with 5 light bulbs. It's a pretty bright room, and it's pretty dark in here. So,
Right.
but yeah, I think these were probably very similar to the sunglasses that.
Well, they're just very rare. People don't understand. I mean, people weren't living back then. Those I call these proto Oakleys, basically.
Yeah.
And these were rare for the time period, very rare. In
Yeah.
fact, most all sunglasses were either the bluesman sunglasses that you see.
Yep.
There are some expensive Italian things like Don Draper would wear,
Yep.
or the aviator sunglasses.
Right.
Not these.
And I
were not in
I
fashion.
believe some people have found that people could use these for shooting,
Yeah.
for eye protection, for shooting, and things like that. So
Look, I'm factory tours. Somebody was like factory tours, and
Yep.
I forget what these Solarama is. What
Solarama.
Solarama.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what the name is. But no, like I said, I was stunned that I can see, because people always ask, how was Cooper able to do the money bag and do all this stuff with his sunglasses on? There is literally nothing I could not do.
Yeah. Oh, I can definitely see. It's just very dark. And frankly, like, these are remarkable because I think these are from like 35 years ago. No, 55 years ago. And these look as stylish today. I mean, I'd wear these today. I bet you if I wore these to the beach, not a single person would think they were old or old fashioned, or, I mean, they're ahead of their time in terms of style, I think. So,
yeah. And Chris was able to find these because I mean, you can do it. Look for yourself. Try to find 1960s wraparounds that they just barely exist. It's these and nothing else, really.
Right. And these are interesting because, remember, we talked about side profiles before. Tina claims she only saw Cooper from the side. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Mitchell probably only saw Cooper primarily from the side. So, in terms of like a side profile, that's what they're, similar to what they're looking at.
Even the sideburns too. People forget about the sideburns with Cooper. Tina says that Cooper's sideburns were low ear level, so somewhere around here. It's an important thing to remember about Cooper, is he actually did have sideburns, and we overlook that so often, that he had sideburns, but he did. Yeah, It's funny. She says Rose says the last pair sold on eBay for $100. That wasn't what I spent.
It's not what I spent either. I got a better deal than that.
Yeah, we got them for cheaper. So, all right. Next, we have Cooper was the last to board 305. No, not true. That would be Bill Mitchell, actually, was the last one to board. Robert Gregory made a claim that he was the last one to board. That's not true. Bill was the last one to board. Bill said he was the last one to board. I believe Bill, and he was hustling to get there. His friend had dropped him off. They had driven up from Eugene. It was Thanksgiving break, and he ran into the airport and just was looking at at whatever they call those things, the arrivals, departures, and saw Seattle flight 305 leaving in 20 minutes or whatever, and was like, oh, I can maybe make that. And another thing that makes me believe that really confirms this is when they got the flight manifest.
Yes, I was going to bring this up. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
When the flight manifest, they did not have the names of the passengers who were on the earlier legs of the flight right away. All they had were what the gate agent gave to the FBI, who were in Portland there, the FBI in Portland got there. Himmelsbach and those guys were there too. And he handed over all of the tickets, the boarding passes that were given to him as they went onto the tarmac to go. and they're going to be in, the most recent one he was given is going to be at the top. And so we actually have, when the FBI go on to the bus, Bill Mitchell always talks about how the first name was his name. They said Mitchell, and he goes, yeah. Then they said Dan Cooper, and everybody's like looking around. So that really kind of confirms that sequence of boarding.
And that strikes me as a very DB Cooper thing to do, because instead of being the last, which you might be recognizable, or the first, which might be conspicuous, he's just second to last, which, kind of just puts him, amongst the crowd. Again, doesn't draw any, very inconspicuous order. And, but he's still able. And I think he wanted to be at the rear of the aircraft when he perpetrated this whole thing. So it allowed him to remain inconspicuous and secure a seat toward the rear of the aircraft.
And him being second to last, honestly, is part of my theory that he may have been left-handed, because with Bill arriving behind him, that means Cooper did have a choice between which side he wanted to sit on.
Yeah. And
he chose to sit on the starboard side of the plane. That's the right side of the plane. And like I said, for me, honestly, I feel like I know from speaking to Martin McNally, he chose that side of the plane because he wanted his left hand to be free to point the gun or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I think that Cooper, I mean, again, I don't know, but he definitely, Cooper had a choice of which side to sit on.
Right. And just as a side note too, I don't want to belabor this, but one of the reasons that the passengers had to enter the aircraft from the air stairs that Cooper eventually jumped off of is that there was construction going on in the terminal at the time that forced the passengers to, instead of entering as you normally would along a jetway to the side of the aircraft or toward the front, they had to come up the rear air stairs. Yeah, and it was not great weather in Portland at that time. It was a little kind of misty and kind of wet. So
it was wet. Yeah. They were upset that they had to walk out and get wet to get on the plane. That they spoke to that, which is interesting. And that goes into the next myth, is that Cooper sat on the port side of the aircraft. That'd be the left side. Yeah.
Well, you recently did a great video, by the way, on media portrayals and movies. And I don't know if you counted, but there was it seemed like every single one put Cooper on the wrong side of the aircraft.
Only 2 of them got it right.
Yeah.
2 out of 10.
Yeah. Cooper sat, as you're walking up the air stairs, sat on the right-hand side or the starboard side of the aircraft.
Yep. I've just pulled up here this image that I made. This is my best effort to try to figure out where people were sitting according to their statements. That, this is basically what I've got. And as you can see there, on the back, Dan Cooper sat in the middle, he sat in the middle of the last row, 18E. There's his seat there in the middle there, with a fingerprint smudge on it. But there is his seat. And interestingly, I wish I had a wider shot of that. Maybe I do. His seat, actually, the window, it's discussed this. It's been discussed a good bit. I believe Bruce discussed it a little bit. But if you look at his, let's see, I'm going to try to find that image there, if I could find that of it. But dang, where'd it go? There we go. Yeah, here we go. I'm pulling this up right now. If you look at a full image of that shot there, you can see the window is not precisely right next to where you're sitting. It's a little forward of where you're sitting, whereas most of the seats have windows, right next to the seat. Bruce liked to speculate that maybe another reason to sit in the back is that on 727s, that rear row did not have a window that was directly adjacent to the row, which might have made it more difficult for snipers to get a shot at him if they wanted to. So it was kind of offset. We're not sure.
Sidebar, go back to that photo, Ryan. Directly behind that seat is the lavatory, correct?
That's the door. Yeah, that's the doorknob right there to the
Right.
lavatory.
So just so people can visualize when when the plane lands in Seattle and Cooper goes to the lavatory for what I believe Tina describes as 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
That's where he would have gone. He just would have gotten up and it would have been right behind him. So
right there. He walked
it's
into
not
that.
like he's walking down the aisle or walking past a bunch of people to get to the lavatory.
Right, for sure. So let's see. Cooper,
Okay, so busted. Cooper sat on the starboard side of the aircraft.
I don't know. I think that's another error that is in the Gunther book. I feel like the Gunther book, I feel like the Gunther book might have him like sitting in 18B or something, or maybe 15B or 15C. It's not accurate. So Cooper went to the cockpit to make his demands.
Yeah. Nope. He absolutely never went past the first class curtain. He never, to my knowledge, got up out of his seat except to use the lavatory. Like, obviously, when they landed in Seattle and the money and the chutes were received and the passengers were off, obviously he got up, moved around, checked the money and those types of things. But while the plane was in the air and he was proceeding to give his demands, he never got up out of his seat. All of his demands were relayed through Florence or Tina. And they would do that through the interphone, which is, again, directly in that rear part of the aircraft. Now there is some question. So busted. Cooper never went to the cockpit. In fact, the flight crew, Captain Scott, co-pilot Bill Radicek, flight engineer Harold Anderson, never laid eyes on DB Cooper. Never laid eyes on him. However, there seems to be a little bit of possibility that Radicek may have conversed with him on the phone directly.
I'd love to ask him that. That's one of those things that if I speak to him, I'd like to ask him, did you actually speak to him, or was it always with Tina as a middleman?
Right.
Middle woman, I guess.
Right. Now, there's another little piece of this. We know that he sent a note. He gave Florence a note. And we know that there were certain demands written down on something, possibly an envelope. All of those things were apparently retrieved by Cooper eventually. But there's a little bit of debate about what was actually written on. Did he write on the matchbooks? Did he not write on the matchbooks? It was always been a little bit of a discussion, debate in the vortex. So
it's been a debate. I think I've sufficiently proven that it was, at least I'm arguing in the book, and always have lots of sources in my book. That's the thing about my book, is always sourced, that it was the envelope. Essentially, it was the envelope that contained the hijacking note. Florence says it in, I think, in her 302. She says that she wrote on the back of the envelope. She couldn't find anything to write on. She did have a pen, like in her bag, in her purse. She actually goes into her purse to get a pen and gets the pen out and writes on the envelope. And that is what is taken. She actually takes the envelope and she takes the original note and the envelope go up to the cockpit. And it's interesting that if you listen to Bill Radicek, he says that Florence literally walks in and puts the note on the center console there, literally right as they are lifting off. Radicek is always a hero. He says that Captain Scott was over rotating, looking at the note, and he said, "Oh, we're Captain Scott, we're rotating too much or something, right?" So maybe Bill saves the plane from crashing immediately, right? But he says that it is interesting, the timing of that, the timing that he. If we could discuss that for a second, he handed the note while they were taxiing. So like they're driving down, maybe not even on the runway yet. They're just taxiing to the runway. And, I believe you tried to time it with your wife and children.
4 or 5 minutes.
From when?
Yeah. And that was conservative, 4 or 5 minutes. So it could have taken longer, but I actually reenacted that entire scenario with my daughter in the living room where, I had the seats arranged and we did the whole thing and, looking back and kind of making eye contact, kind of like, hey, look at that note. That's not what's the expression that they used back then? Starts with an M, some old timey word that they used. No, some old timey word they described, like notes where you're trying to like get someone's attention.
A mash note?
Mash note, yes. So so it took about 4 or 5 minutes. And I think that's probably the time that it took from the moment that Cooper handed Flo the note to the time that she actually read it and either gave it to Tina or dropped it on the floor and Tina picked it up. Right. Now, is that definitive? I don't know. Could have taken longer, could have taken shorter, but in the scenario where we kind of reenacted and the movements and those types of things to make it realistic, because, I don't think he's going to look back twice and she's going to do it. It would take, a few times for her to realize, oh, this guy's.
Well, and then you've got her coming over and him showing her the bomb and him.
Correct.
Her saying, is this for real? And yada, yada, yada. Then you've got Tina getting involved in it.
Yeah.
And so it takes Tina a minute or two to figure out what's going on. And so really, I mean, he was taking a risk that Flo could have just screamed in terror and they never would have taken off from Seattle. Now, obviously he could have just said, as hijackers did, fly to Seattle. Obviously he could have said that. And maybe he would have, maybe his whole plan, maybe it was always to go to Seattle. But that is a weird thing about when we talk about Cooper's planning. Was he really planning to jump where he jumped all along, or was it just circumstance? Because like I said, this whole thing could have happened theoretically in Portland if she had freaked out and they never get off the ground. He didn't know that Flo was going to be calm and not raise the alarm. So they're literally in Portland when he hands her the note. So she could have immediately grabbed the phone and said, we're being hijacked or whatever. Right. And so the whole thing could have happened in Portland. So we assumed that he wanted it to happen in Seattle, and maybe he did, but we don't know that. Would you agree?
Yes, but on the other hand, they boarded, I think it was 2:45.
Yeah.
And there were lots of activity that went on prior to him handing the note. I think there was a drink order placed there.
Yeah, he had a drink. He drank. He spilled a drink.
Those types of things. So if you're wanting to hijack the plane in Portland, why not do it right then? Why not hand her the note as he gets his drink? I think the fact that he was doing it as the plane was a minute, 2 minutes from taking off, I think is probably indicative of the fact, that, and then why not just. Yeah, I
would just say wait until they're off the ground.
Yes, sure.
What's the disadvantage there?
Yeah, you're right. But on the other hand, why wait until they're about to take off? Why not just do it? I mean, he could have handed that note to her as he's walking up the stairs, and she gives him, he takes the ticket. So,
right.
So yeah, I don't think that the intent was to hijack it out of Portland. I think the intent was, to have the hijacking take place on the ground in Portland. I think his intent was to fly to Seattle all along.
Well, and as we discussed, Seattle was where the big banks were, and that is where he would have had the best chance.
And honestly, it took and presumably he would know it's going to take a minute for them to secure parachutes. It's going to take them a minute to secure $200,000. So where am I safer? On the ground, surrounded by FBI snipers and SWAT teams, et cetera, or
in the air,
25,000 feet in the air, circling the Puget Sound, where it's just me against, anybody who wants to test if this is a real bomb or not.
Excellent point there.
I think he's probably safer in the air. So, yeah.
All right. So we've got Cooper was involved in a physical altercation with a passenger on the flight. So this is a bit confusing, not really, but okay. So all of this comes from, let's just back up. So one of the passengers on the flight was a 50-something-year-old guy from Missoula, Montana, a bit of a cowboy. You can see him wearing a cowboy hat actually in the videos of the in the videos of the passengers getting off. And his name was Robert Cummings. It's actually a Purple Heart World War II veteran, which I like that. But he was apparently upset about the delay. He was just unimpressed that they were delayed, and he had been not drinking a lot. This is the conflation. People seem to believe that the cowboy and the obnoxious drunk were the same person. We have incidents described on the plane of a cowboy who was being a bit belligerent, and we also have reports of a obnoxious drunk on the plane. Larry Feingold said that that's one way he would spot anybody who ever claims they were on the plane, is to ask them about, what about the drunk guy, and see if they say anything, right? And so obviously everyone noticed this guy, but in the vortex, we've kind of assumed this was the same person, because there is a passenger did go back to Tina and started hassling her, gave her some lip about, what are we doing? Why are we delayed? What the hell's going on here? Give me a magazine. I need something to do. And she gets up, and it's kind of this whole thing going on. And according to George Lebissonier,
is that where she gave him the ladies' home journal?
Right. No, Hardy Har. She actually gave my a New Yorker. He wanted a Sports Illustrated. She goes, we don't have that. So she gave this cowboy from Missoula, Montana, a New Yorker, which I kind of find funny. But at any rate, so George Lebissonier was a lawyer who was coming back from a deposition with his client, who was Lester Pollard, who was a trucking magnate of some repute in Seattle. And they were coming back, and Lebissonier, I looked up his past. He had several DUIs on his record. As a lawyer back then, those guys did drink. They had just had a deposition. I can see them tying one on at the airport after they're done, going to the bar there, that sort of thing. This was the era of Mad Men, remember?
Yeah, and honestly, like, if you're getting a DUI in the 60s,
it's hard to do.
Hard to do, because that was not a big deal back then.
Right. It's
you
like
really had to be swerving and weaving, and yeah.
Yeah. So Lebissonier tells the FBI this story. His 302. I would advise people to go on to norjack.org, my website, and read George Lebissonier's 302, and imagine it being a description of the hijacking from a drunk person. Like, it almost reads like a drunk person's recollection of events, where they make themselves more important than they really were. He says Cooper was wearing a sporty vest. Just no, he doesn't mention the bomb. He says he has to go to the bathroom a whole bunch of times. That's another thing. He admits that he went to the bathroom several times. Well, that tells me that's a guy who's been drinking, because he's going to the bathroom a lot. Okay. So that's another strike. And then the fact is, let's think about this. George Lebissonier admits to the FBI that I went to the bathroom a whole bunch of times. Bill Mitchell told me that when they were on the bus, and the passengers got off the plane and they go into the bus, where the FBI came on and did the roll call, where they figured out who Dan Cooper was not there, that the obnoxious drunk, of course, Bill Mitchell didn't know who it was, but he says the obnoxious drunk yelled out, "Hey, how long is this going to take? I got to piss." So I am conflating that this guy who had to pee was the same guy who went to the bathroom a bunch of times on the plane. And that would be George Lebissonier. And if you look at the video footage of the passengers coming off the plane, Robert Cummings, the cowboy, he is not looking drunk. He looks very stern and angry. Whereas Lebissonier, his hair is like really askew. It's almost like he was just laid back or something. And again, so Lebissonier says that the cowboy, the name the cowboy actually comes from Lebissonier. Lebissonier says that the cowboy came back to hassle Tina, and that Cooper was amused at first. He thought it was amusing that this cowboy was getting in this girl's face. And then Cooper goes, hey, go back to your seat, and that the cowboy ignored him. The cowboy completely ignored Cooper, and that Lebissonier saves the day. Lebissonier says that he convinces the cowboy to go back to his seat, which that sounds like a drunk guy saying, "Oh yeah, I did that." When really Tina just says, "I gave the guy a magazine and he pissed off," basically, which I think that's more realistic.
Yeah. So when I entered the vortex, the story that I heard or thought was that there was a drunk who got into an altercation with another passenger, some type, not verbal altercation, not physical, and that Cooper literally had to jump out of his seat and pull the two men apart and yell at them to knock it off or things of that nature, which is a highly dramatic
sure.
rendition of what actually occurred. So
right, and the original FBI document, the very first document that they sent to J. Edgar Hoover, uses the term scuffle between Cooper and a passenger. Yeah. And then we have a later document a few days later saying, where they amend it and say, look, it really wasn't a scuffle. We messed that up. It was, he just spoke to him briefly. Maybe he never did.
Yeah.
Tina has no memory of this.
Right. And the addendum to that is that Cooper, after that, turned to Tina and said, if that's a air marshal, if that's a sky marshal, there's going to be problems.
Yeah, I don't want any more of that.
Words to that effect.
Yeah, I don't want any more of that if that guy's a sky marshal. And really, that kind of makes sense when you look at the passengers. Le Bissonniere looks like a drunk getting off the plane. Robert Cummings, a guy in a cowboy hat looking all angry, could pass for a sky marshal. Maybe that's what he was. If you look at the video of Cummings, I could see why Cooper might think that guy was a cop or something.
Right.
He kind of has that vibe. All right. So no, there wasn't.
Myth busted. Cooper did not get into a physical altercation with another passenger.
No. And so, all right. So I'll let you take this one. Cooper rejected the military chutes when he learned they were coming from McChord Air Force Base.
Yeah. This is one that's persisted for a while. And it got me maybe a couple of years ago going down a rabbit hole. Bottom line is no. Cooper did not reject military chutes. And the myth that was put forth was that Cooper was offered chutes from McChord Air Force Base, was offered military chutes and rejected them and said, no, I don't want military chutes. I want civilian chutes. And that appears in an article, a news article shortly after the case. And I can't remember.
New York Times.
Is it the New York Times? Yeah.
Fair enough.
But the FBI files and the communication between the crew and ground control and Northwest Airlines indicate quite differently. It appears, based on the communications that I have read, is that, just kind of extrapolating, is that when Cooper made his demands, front chute, back chute, Northwest Airlines immediately approached McChord Air Force Base, which makes sense. That's reasonable. Now, after that, it gets a little dodgy about why exactly McChord did not provide the chutes. I think it was something about cost.
It was just red tape.
Bureaucratic red tape. Yeah.
Well, they wanted it because they discussed, hey, should we put chafe in there?
Yeah, all that. Right. And that's where you get into Major Dawson and that whole rabbit hole with, and his questionable testimony or whatever about what actually happened. So what actually happened is Northwest Airlines approached McChord about the possibility of providing chutes to Cooper. That fell through. But that message about it falling through was never really relayed properly to the crew.
Yeah.
So it was relayed to the crew that because it took a long time, Cooper's waiting on the ground far longer than he wanted to. His demand was by 5 p.m. And time's ticking. It's past his deadline. He's getting impatient. He's getting antsy. I forget the word that they use in the the crew uses. Itchy, I think, is the word. He's getting itchy. So he was getting impatient with the delay in the chutes and the money. And he asked the crew, the cockpit crew, about it. And cockpit crew said, hey, where are these chutes? And they were told they're on their way from McChord.
Yeah. We've got that in the actual transcript.
Yes, it's in the transcript. So even though they were not coming from McChord, people working flight dispatch and flight operations in Seattle communicated inaccurately to the crew that the parachutes were coming from McChord. That was later relayed to Cooper through Tina, and at which point we have Cooper saying, well, God damn it, McChord Air Force Base is only 20 minutes from here, or 20
Right.
miles from here. There's a little debate about
Shouldn't take this long. Yeah.
whether it's minutes or miles, but either way, he's like, McCord shouldn't take that long. Shouldn't take that long to get the shoots from McCord. So Cooper, throughout this entire ordeal,
Never knew. Yeah.
presumably assumed that the shoots were coming from McCord, even though they were not. But at no time.
And when he jumped, even, I think,
Yeah.
For the rest of his life, Cooper probably assumed that
Right.
that they came from the Air Force Base.
Right. Whether his life lasted 60 seconds or 60 years,
right.
He probably lived and died thinking that, that the shoots came from McCord Air Force Base. But no, myth busted. He did not reject military shoots in favor of civilian ones.
Right. And while we're on the topic, this was, as far as like, there are certain myths that we have to like put an asterisk next to as like ultimate myths. And one of the ultimate myths is that Cooper chose a military parachute over a civilian skydiving chute, which is completely inaccurate. We know now from the FBI files that Cooper's choices, I'll put it on the screen, Cooper's choices were these. Okay, now that's not an image on the right of Cooper's chute. We don't know exactly what his chute looked like, but the image on the left is the one that he looked at. Cooper's own eyes looked at this parachute and said, "Nah, I don't want that one." That's the one that's in the museum. That is a World War II era parachute container. Now, it's important to remember that manufacture dates, when we're talking about this, are when the canopy inside the pack was made. So the pack itself is important to a point, but not really. The canopies are what you're really concerned with on parachutes, although the pack can make it easier to open and more convenient to open. Both of the rigs that he was given were put in a taxi cab by Norman Hayden. They were owned by Norman Hayden. He was a civilian. He was a stunt pilot, and he had these chutes that were given to him, made for him by Earl Cossey, because the FAA made a rule that said that if you own a 2-seater plane, that you have to have, and you're doing stunts, you have to have as many parachutes as you have seats in your plane. Okay, so even though no one ever flew with Norm Hayden, his plane had 2 seats in it, so he had to have 2 parachutes. And what's funny about it is that they even if nobody was in the plane with you, they made you put a second parachute in there. So whenever Norman Hayden flew around, he had 2 parachutes with him. He had a World War II era tan backpack, which is what you're seeing there on the left, which had a 26-foot canopy. And he had a NB6, that means Navy Backpack 6, that was sage green. And that color right there you see there is sage green. That is a sage green NB6. And that it had a 24-foot canopy. Now, the manual, we know the date of the canopies inside there because we have the packing cards. And the chute that he did not choose was a 1957 chute. And the chute that he did choose was a 1960 canopy. So perhaps his choice merely came down to that the canopy was newer in the MB6. However, if I'm looking at these and you know anything about parachutes, he's probably going to understand that an MB6 is a newer backpack, at least, than this World War II looking thing. So an MB6 would look better than this World War II canopy. So maybe he just chose it because it looked newer. And it was newer. If he checked the packing cards, it would have been newer.
Yeah, there's a couple comments, Ryan. First, it asks Cooper if Cooper did read the packing cards, he would have known that they were not from McCord, correct?
Yeah, I guess so. He could have. Although military chutes do actually have packing cards. That's something that we've kind of learned recently, is that military chutes do have packing cards.
Yeah,
because if something happens to your paratrooper, they want to know who to blame.
Right, right. And the second question that's in the comments is it an MB6 or an MB8? And this is something that's confused me too.
Okay. Earl Cossey himself, who, again, he has become kind of a booger bear a little bit in the Cooper world because of some discrepancies he said later on. But his testimony with the FBI, when you look at the actual documents, is pretty consistent, at least at the start, when his memory is freshest. And he called it an MB6.
Yeah.
He never calls it an MB8 ever.
Yeah.
Always
So,
so I go with MB6.
yeah, and not to beat the parachute stuff to death, but I do think it's informative that Cooper, number one, we've talked about this before, did not bring his own rig, did not bring his own gear. He relied on the FBI to provide him with it.
Right.
And then either didn't know or didn't care what he was jumping with, that he was just happy to throw something on his back and jump. Because he could have been very specific about what chute he wanted, what rig he wanted, what canopy he wanted. And he didn't. He left it to fate as to what chutes he was given. So what, does that tell you? It could tell you he doesn't know and he's a complete wuffo and, doesn't get it, or he's just so experienced and his training and expertise is just such an elite level that, you give him a bed sheet and he could land somewhere.
But there's also an in-between there too. And I would say that it's very possible that Cooper had a few free falls, okay, that he had done some free fall skydiving, but he was not into the hobby enough to own his own gear.
Yeah.
Which was expensive.
Right.
And so, like I said, like Chris said, the copycat skydivers all brought their own gear. You ask any parachutist, any skydiver, Mark Meltzer, anybody you talk to on the drop zone, they all say, hell yeah, I'm bringing my own gear some way. I'm not trusting my life to some random thing. Right. But if you aren't in that skydiving world, and I don't think he was, then, you're going to, take what you can get.
Right. So 2 myths busted. He did not reject military chutes in favor of civilian ones when he was offered them. And he did not choose an inferior chute over a
skydiving chute. Yeah. Correct. I mean, it's just like, oh, he's a dummy because he didn't jump with this. He chose he could have had a skydiving. And what that is Earl Cossey in the early 2000s started telling people that his personal parachute somehow was on the plane, and his personal parachute was this, like, I forget the actual what it was, like a C9 or something. I don't know what some parachute, but he said, oh, it was a great thing, and he, Cooper didn't choose it, and he actually chose it, yada yada yada. And Larry Carr at the time, who a lot of these myths, I love Larry to death, and he's helping me on my book. I consider Larry a friend now, and I'm happy to call him a friend, but Larry, when he first got on the case, he was the first agent who really publicized this stuff in the internet age. And the very first articles that came out about DB Cooper, and it got me into the vortex, I was in law school and saw it on the news. Larry Carr went out and said, hey, said all these things. And among the things he said were that, Cooper, it was about all these myths, and that Cooper had a choice between a civilian and a military, and that he chose the military. And that was like pervasive in the Cooper community forever. Mm-hmm. And like endless debates about what that meant.
Pages and pages and pages on message boards.
And now it's useless.
So there's a comment here from Jonathan Hales that says, so it's not true that the other one had steering.
Neither of these pieces of junk were able to be steered unless you were some badass who could grab the risers and move them a little bit.
Hand to God, I'm not a parachute expert, never jumped in my life. And I've mentioned this before. There was a little bit of play that you could have by grabbing
the risers,
the lines.
They call them the risers.
Right. And kind of turn into or away, kind of turn into the wind. But there wasn't like the sport parachutes that skydivers use where you can like really steer and go different directions. It was basically just being able to turn into the wind so that you're not floating with the wind and hitting the ground at 25, 35 miles an hour.
And one thing that's interesting from skydivers, when you actually talk to them about this case and present the actual facts as we know them now, they almost to a man will go, actually, that wasn't a bad parachute to jump with. Yeah. Because it's going to open. They are designed to open no matter what your body configuration is. If you pull the ripcord, they are designed for emergency bailouts, people who have never parachuted in their lives. They're designed for people who have never, ever, ever parachuted. This is flight crews on bombers and things. And when they're jumping out, they're just flailing around, jumping from burning aircraft. You don't know. They're spinning out of control. So they're designed, the way that the pack is actually designed is to open up predictably. Okay. And also, because it's a round canopy, they go basically straight down as best they can. Whereas you're going to be moving horizontally in a, I guess, rectangular skydiving rig. And you're going to, and really you'd rather, if you're landing in the dark, you'd rather come right down than, go skidding across the ground, which is what he would have done.
Right. Right.
And I was going to say that while we're on the parachutes, we can wrap up the parachutes and just jump to the dummy chute.
Yeah.
We'll just jump to that and we'll into the parachutes. Basically.
Yeah. Well, so busted, didn't reject military chutes in favor of civilian chutes. Did not jump with an inferior chute and chose the wrong one.
Probably chose the right one, actually.
He probably chose the
more reliable, the newer one.
The newer one.
Yeah.
So because they were virtually, I won't say identical, but they were, but to your point, it's kind of like flying a plane. Any landing is a good landing. Any chute that deploys is a good chute.
Right.
So, whether it's a rough land, obviously some chutes are better than others, but if your chute deploys, you're happy.
Right. And all of the copycats, their chutes deployed fine.
Right.
I mean, they were injured. I mean, that is something to keep in mind about Cooper is that McCoy may have been, I believe McCoy was, Heinemann is such a mystery. We don't know what happened to him when he landed, but we know that Rob Hetty dislocated his shoulder when he landed. And this was an actual skydiver. Okay. A
Marty
champion
got a
skydiver.
concussion.
Yeah. McNally got a terrible concussion. LaPointe broke his ankle or damn near broke his ankle. And McCoy may have twisted his ankle too, actually. I think he's limping around actually in the footage of him being arrested. So he may have twisted his ankle, I think.
Right.
So
to your point, did Cooper, so myths busted about the chutes, but here's another parachute, DB Cooper parachute myth. Cooper jumped with the dummy chute.
Yeah, it's a big one. Huge myth. Big myth. So basically, I will pull up and I'll read for everybody, especially because this is a podcast too. This is going to be Earl Cossey's about 2 or 3 days later describing this. What happened was, okay, let me just back up. So the reserve chutes, the front chutes, okay, they came, as I mentioned, the back chutes came from this stunt pilot who threw him in a taxi cab and sent him to the airport. The front chutes came from Seattle Sky Sports, which was in Issaquah, which was a private airfield that catered to skydivers.
Drop zone, right?
A drop zone, essentially, yes. And one of the riggers there was a guy named Earl Cossey. He was their main parachute rigger. And the guy who owned Seattle Sky Sports was a guy named Lynn Emmerich. Now, Lynn Emmerich is the one who actually received the call that night saying, hey, do you have reserve chutes? There's a hijack in this. I mean, I'm sure he was like, what the hell? The skyjacker wants parachutes. What in the world? So anyway, he goes, do you have front reserves? He goes, yeah, I got a couple. So a Washington State high patrolman drove over there and pulled up, and Lynn Emmerich grabbed 2 of the cheapest. He even admits it. He grabs 2 of the cheapest reserves he had because he figured he would never see them again, and threw them in the back of this cop car, and the cop car zoomed off.
Now, was Lynn told what these were for? Was he told there is a hijacking in progress? Yes. The hijacker is demanding these. Presumably, he wants to jump, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Lynn gave a pretty extensive interview a couple days later in the Issaquah paper, where he talks about that. He said, yeah, they said there's a skyjacking. This guy wants parachutes for some reason. And he figured, hey, if the guy does, I mean, the plane, again, all these planes would fly off to parts unknown, usually to Cuba, right? So he's figuring I'll never see this again. So he claims that he gave a non-functioning reserve chute on accident. He says he was just grabbing crappy things. We don't know what this reserve chute looked like. It probably said it's redacted in the FBI files. I believe that it had a tag on it that probably said non-functional or training only. It's redacted. We don't know, but it had something on it that said non-functional training, something like that, right? Do not use unless you want to die, something like that. But this is Cossey's description of it, okay? Cossey says, Mr. Cossey said that the missing chest pack parachute is a good training pack dummied up to look like a good one. He said that by dummying up, he means that the tie downs were attached to the container. This chest pack was devised by Cossey to teach trainees while hung in a harness how to open the chest pack in the event of an emergency. The folds of the parachute are sewn together to preclude the parachute opening in the training room. Then Mr. Cossey said that the backpacks first furnished to the hijacker did not have the hooks on the harnesses to attach a chest pack. We'll get to that second part in a second. The first part, though, about the dummied up, it's basically, he elaborates in later files where he says that he had got a parachute canopy, cut it in half, folded it over and sewn it together, and then attached it inside this dummy chute. So basically, whenever you open this dummy chute, basically a folded canopy is going to fall to the ground during training, and they could just pick it up and put it back in very quickly and easily. Okay. So it wasn't a big deal. Okay. But the essential part of this is that those front reserves back then, they hooked onto the front of the parachute with clips. Okay.
So you had the backpack, and then you had the dummy, the front reserve, which kind of sat on your abdomen, correct?
Your chest.
Okay, chest. Okay, a little higher than your abdomen. And then that front reserve would then clip on to hooks.
On the backpack.
On the backpack.
The backpacks usually had these called D-rings, these clips. Okay, and that's what the reserves would clip onto. Cooper's, because they were military emergency backpacks, military, you were just happy to have a parachute at all, did not much less reserves. Also, these were worn by pilots a lot, and pilots can't, you can't fit a reserve chute while you're sitting there in your seat, right? So neither of the Cooper's parachute backpacks had D-rings. So even if Cooper wanted to jump with a dummy chute, he could not have. So the mystery, though, is that this dummy chute was not in the plane when it landed. So
it was never found.
So the FBI concluded that he just threw it out the back at some point, which would be my guess too.
Well, for a time being, the belief was that he did jump with the dummy chute.
Right.
And that was indicative that he was inexperienced and couldn't tell it was a dummy. Right. And then 2, he probably died because the back chute may have failed and he tried to pull the dummy and it didn't work. Right.
Which is just, no. And so, and we spent a long time discussing this dummy chute. What does this mean? What does this mean? And Tina, Cooper, we don't have a real indication that he ever opened the dummy chute in the plane. He opened, obviously, the other reserve he opened in the plane. The dummy chute, my speculation would be that he didn't like the way it looked because it would have looked a lot lumpy and a little different. And again, if you looked at it, if it said training, or it said something on it that would have indicated that it was.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because it was passed along for years and years and years and years and years that it had a, quote, red X on it, a black X on it, that it was definitively marked as a dummy, somehow marked differently than the other one, indicating that it was, in fact, a non-workable parachute. But I have not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I have not seen anything that it was marked with an X.
No.
In any way, shape, or form.
No, we actually, in fact, the opposite. We've got one of the very, very early 302s from the date of the hijacking. We've got a description from somebody, whoever grabbed them out of the trunk of the high patrol car. It just says that they were 2 green olive drab front chutes. He describes them. So, Sheridan Peterson did say it had a red X on it. Nikki Broughton has spoken to a couple guys who had jumped at Issaquah, and they said that one of the training parachutes did have a red X on it. But again, that would almost be, Lynn Emmerich surely would have seen a red X and get, okay, well.
So Ryan, let me ask you, because you're far more informed about the parachutes than I ever care to be. The fact that he asked for a back chute 2 back chutes, and 2 front chutes. Even we know the reason he asked for 4 chutes was because he wanted the FBI to think that he was taking somebody with him to prevent the FBI from sabotaging the parachute, right?
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, does the fact that he asked for a back and a front indicate anything to you about his experience level in the sense that these back chutes could not be jumped with a front reserve?
Well, I think that Cooper assumed that when he asked for a front and a back, they would have given him backs that had the capacity to attach front chutes.
And which one of those would have been? Those would have been what, like free fall like paratrooper chutes? Like
no, just a
what
little
kind
more
of back
modern.
chutes are used in conjunction with front reserves like that?
Most
free fall. Just
most free fall chutes at the time had D-rings. In fact, if you look at that's one of the ways that we debunked Dan Greider's parachute find in 30 seconds, is that he claims he found this, this thing about he claims he finds this parachute inside, a storage unit or whatever, and it has D-rings on it. Because they normally had D-rings. That was the only way you could wear a reserve back then, was with D-rings. So all free fall skydivers had D-rings on their backpacks, and I think Cooper just assumed it. And if we believe what Tusaw said, that Cooper actually was bitching about it to Tina. He goes, "Hey, where are my D-rings?" He saw him. I was like, "What? This is stupid." So, but I think Cooper at some point just chunked out the dummy chute, and the FBI believed it too. When the FBI sent the SR-71 to go try to find things, they were looking for the dummy chute and for the briefcase, because they said there was no reason for Cooper to have jumped with those on his body.
And the Air Force had to politely explain to the FBI that that's not how it works.
Yeah, because they were like, "Oh, can't you do infrared?" They're like, "No, things have to be alive and hot to be infrared."
Yeah.
And we actually have that 302 where the Air Force is like, "That's not how this works." And the FBI goes, "Oh, okay." But all right, so let's see.
Dummy chute. Did not jump with the dummy chute.
No, he literally could not have jumped with the dummy chute.
Now, is there a way he could have? I mean, he jerry rigged the money bag.
The money bag, yeah.
Possible he could have jerry rigged the dummy chute to himself for some purpose.
Tina didn't see him.
Been suggested. I just saw Jude mention that is it possible he could have shoved the money in there?
It is possible.
There's no need to because the money bag was
plenty full. It had plenty of space.
Plenty of space.
It had a neck on it. Tina expressly says it had a neck to it, which Cooper wrapped around the thing. So it had enough space in there it wasn't spilling out. Right. There's no need to do this.
Correct. Second question before we move on. I'm going to lose my train of thought here. It'll come to me.
Dummy chutes, D-rings.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Okay, well,
lost my thought, went out. It'll come back.
Happens. All right. Next one, and I'll take this one. Cooper angrily used foul language at the crew. This is a Himmelsbachian thing. No one else ever says this. There is literally nothing in the FBI files or from any witnesses or from any crew member.
Not only that, but it's contradictory.
Yes, he was very polite. He was not nervous. He, all that good stuff that we've got, of Tina, where she's expressly says that he was not nervous. Right. That's just not how that goes.
Right. And to be fair, Radachek is also quoted as parroting this. I've read news articles where Radachek parrots Himmelsbach in that Cooper was using, that he was foul-mouthed, using foul language, et cetera, et cetera. But both in his statements and the statements from the other crew members at the time, that's just not true. Cooper was polite. In fact, he smiled at Flo when she went to get her purse. Sure. And he said, he smiled and said, "I don't bite."
Right.
So he did get impatient, itchy, as it's described. He got impatient with the timing and the delays that were going on and the fuel and refueling and things like that. So he did get, probably a little amped up a little bit, but in terms of using foul language and screaming at the crew.
No. And where this comes from, I'm quite certain, is in the Norjack book. Himmelsbach tells a story about how somebody with the last name Cooper, I believe it was when he was investigating a guy named Merlin Gene Cooper, that this guy had basically the description of Merlin Gene Cooper that is in the Norjack book is, and I've actually got it. I believe I've actually got it right here. This is the description of Merlin Gene Cooper from Ralph Himmelsbach book, from his book. He says, one of these boys, the woman said, later went into military service, and after his discharge went through several marriages. She described him as the kind of man who took advantage of women. Faithless, he would live off women, use them. His language was coarse, and he was a heavy smoker. His fingers were stained from the curling vapors. He had slender facial features, brown hair, a dark complexion, and black piercing eyes. Now, that comes up several times. Himmelsbach, whenever he mentions Cooper having foul language, he'll talk about how Cooper had cigarette vapors around his fingers and smoked like a criminal, and
his nicotine-stained fingers, right?
Yeah, it's literally verbatim his description in Norjack.
You think the two were conflated? That
100%.
That Himmelsbach is conflating D.B. Cooper and this other fellow that he looked into?
Yes, by the time that Unsolved Mysteries came around, and Himmelsbach says he used foul language and smoked with vape, had cigarette stains and
that finger. It's funny we didn't mention that. That's not on our list, but the fingers that were stained with nicotine, because I think most people, obviously smoking isn't quite as common as it used to be back in the day, but I can certainly recall uncles and family members who chain smoked, and they would have like a tan or a brown stain on their fingertips where they, held the cigarette.
Heinemann did. That was part of one of the in Frederick Heinemann's description from his stewardesses. They described the hijacker as having cigarette stains on his fingers, which obviously Heinemann ordered 2,000 cigarettes as part of his ransom. So clearly this man loved to smoke.
Right. So,
but by the way, let me jump back for a second. Nicole is asking, she says, did Cossie alter the chute that Cooper chose? No, that was Cossie. No, he did not. No, that's a Cossieism.
Hey, he told Larry he did.
He also told Larry that it was his personal parachute on the plane too, which is bullshit. So
Larry believes him.
No, you talk to somebody. Well, of course he does, but you talk to someone like Mark Meltzer. Look, Cossie was giving these chutes to a guy who had bought them. He's not going to be jury rigging a parachute, in some weird fashion to give to a novice. That'd be a death sentence. I mean, why would you do that?
Does Earl Cossie strike you as a man that would care?
No, but again, it doesn't really matter. It's the ripcord. You're not missing a ripcord. I mean, like you're saying your life depends on one thing.
We're assuming that he never explained that to Hayden. Hayden didn't even really want these chutes. He probably wouldn't have carried those chutes in his airplane to begin with. He never. You're a pilot. You don't expect to have to use a parachute.
Even if they were, I agree. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, he never expected these to ever be used.
Right.
But again, we're talking about a ripcord here being moved. I mean, before you jump, you're going to figure out where your ripcord is. In fact, he's probably jumping with his hand on the ripcord.
Let's compromise and just say undetermined.
Undetermined, sure. All right. We were talking about the foul language. Yes.
So before we move on, I remembered what I was going to ask you. That's a quick answer. The dummy chutes. We know that he cut the canopy, folded it in half, sewed it together. Did the dummy chutes have shroud lines inside of it?
That's a good question. I've received dual answers on that. Mark Meltzer says that sometimes they would and sometimes they didn't.
Because what I'm getting at, is it possible that he opened the dummy chute looking for shroud lines to jerry rig the money bag, realized there's none in there, got pissed, and went to the other chute and then chucked the dummy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, especially if he knew, that's a good point. If he knew that this was a dummy chute just by looking at it and it says instructional only or whatever, right? Well, then he's like, okay, well, I can cannibalize this one. This is the one that may have been the one he wanted to cannibalize, the one that didn't work, right? Yeah. And then he goes, oh shit, this isn't going to work at all. because Tina does say that it's weird. Tina gives a description. She says that Cooper was Tina says he opened one of the parachutes and tried to stuff some of the money inside an unfolded parachute. Now, that's a weird way to describe a canopy that's open, unfolded, because clearly the way that Cassie described it was folded over and sewn, right? So it would have looked like a folded bed sheet or something like that to her. So that may have been the dummy chute.
That just occurred to me as we were talking about shroud lines and whatnot. And I thought, well, does a dummy chute need shroud lines?
It doesn't. No.
So maybe it didn't. And maybe he opened it up thinking he could use that and then was shocked to find out there were no shroud lines. So
right.
Anyways,
right.
moving on.
Move on. All right. So Cooper warned the pilot he was wearing a wrist altimeter.
That's a Cockpit thing. I'm going to let you handle that.
Yeah, that's some Jack Bryant Cockpit nonsense. Cockpit, I don't want to get in, it's too deep to get into, but basically this guy was a con man, and before he died, he conned a couple people into thinking he was Cooper, and they went and got a bunch of producers in Hollywood to sign on to the Cockpit story. And part of the Cockpit story was published in Hustler. There was an article in Hustler, which is where we get the perverse idea that Tina was sexually assaulted by Cooper. The FBI, after that article came out, the FBI did ask Tina, and we do have her saying it's redacted, but you can basically imply that she's saying he never had the opportunity to put his hands on me. So that's not true. But Cockpit apparently, I mean, there are some interesting things in Cockpit, and I'll get into that. I mean, we got time. Everybody's hanging out. Cockpit, some interesting things in his story. Cockpit says that he jumped by Mount Hood, which obviously is just way off. So you can't, it's one of these things when your drop zone is inaccurate, everything else you say, it is instantly the fruit of the poisonous tree. Everything else is dead. Everything you say is bogus. If your drop zone is that, we know roughly where Cooper jumped within a county at least, So, but Cockpit has a couple interesting things. One of the things that Cockpit says is that he claims that his mystery bag was a plastic bag, which Tina does say it was a plastic bag. Cockpit says that after he had tied his money together or whatever, that he slipped the money bag into this plastic bag. Think of like a garbage bag, right? And then cinched it and then tied that together, which makes sense. Look, if you're jumping on a wet night with $200,000, you're going to want to keep that money dry. Why not? I mean, just don't want to keep it, get a soggy bag or whatever. So actually placing it inside of a garbage bag and then putting it together right before you jump out, it's kind of smart. And also, once you get to the ground, if you're going to walk around with it, it's a lot more inconspicuous walking around with a garbage bag down the road or something, or just, whatever, than a freaking bank bag with paracord tied around it, right? That's not smart. Another thing Cockpit says that the reason why the only 36 passengers were on a plane the day before Thanksgiving that could have held 110, he says that he called ahead. He spent a few days calling ahead, making fake reservations, taking up space. Now, that's a cute idea that could be in a spy novel. That's not a terrible, fictional idea, but we know that's not true, or we assume, because surely Northwest Airlines, after the hijacking, would have said, hey, FBI, we had 50 no-shows that day, right? That would have been something that would have come up. We had 50 reservations that weren't on the plane. So I do think that that's not true, but that's a cute idea. And Cockpit says that he had a wrist altimeter. Cockpit says that he had in his mystery bag, he had a can of aerosol. And when he landed, he basically, like at a frat party or something, he got a lighter and blew the aerosol, making a flame, and burned the parachute canopy, which you could do. I mean, it will burn. So he said that's not a terrible idea either. So Cockpit certainly thought this through, his lies, a lot better than I would say Rekka did, because there's some kind of neat things in there. He also says, Cockpit, allegedly, this is post hoc Tina Barr. Cockpit died in 1976. His champion, Byron Brown, who was the guy he told this to, said that Kofelt said that after he offered the money to Tina, that he like just laid it down next to his seat, and that he realized that the money was still there after he had already tied his money bag together, and that he just and that he had nowhere to put this bundle, and that he just threw it out, and he just said sayonara and threw it out the back of the plane, and that's the Tina Bar money. Now I say that is a post hoc Tina Bar invention to explain that. Now you come up with that story. You show me someone saying that before Tina Bar, and we can talk, but that's a post hoc garbage. So
myth busted. No wrist altimeter.
No.
Or at least that right. He didn't tell the pilots that.
Right.
That's the crux of this. Cooper may, whether he was, whoever Cooper was, he may very well have had a wrist altimeter in that bag of his, but we have no evidence of that, and he certainly didn't tell.
And no, Daniel Barnes asks, you guys believe that the Tina Bar money was planted there or not? Neither of us think that. No, we are both natural arrival people of some sort. How it got there, sort, but it's not planted there. As we've said a million times,
that's literally the dumbest place to plant money.
Yes. If you're going to plant money, you would have planted it on the shores of Lake Merwin or something.
Right. Or the Lewis River or somewhere.
Yeah, Lewis River, Washougal or somewhere.
You don't bury money to plant it, to have somebody find it. If you're going to have somebody find it, you leave it out. So,
right.
Yeah, no, not planted. Not planted. So, busted. No wrist altimeter that he reported to the crew.
All right, you got the next one, Chris. Or ask me the next one, I guess.
Cooper specified. So now we're getting into the money. We're moving down the chronology here. He's made his demands, and Cooper demanded $200,000 in $20 bills, and he wanted them brand new and unmarked.
No, he said circulated currency. So now, okay, we've got three different descriptions of Cooper's money demand. Okay, we've got Tina says he wanted circulated U.S. currency. Another thing says circulated American currency. And then Radacek, or whoever the pilot was, I believe, Chris, I'm right on this, the pilot says in the transcript, negotiable American currency.
Right.
Which that sounds so stilted. I just can't picture a hijacker saying that term.
Right. And people have really focused in on the fact that it's U.S. currency, American currency, to suggest, well, why would an American specify American currency? Someone who was a Canadian perhaps might specify American currency. If you're an American and you're in America and you're demanding ransom money, you're going to assume that it's U.S. currency or American currency. So much hay has been made about that. Specifically.
And I don't really buy that. All right, here's one for you. So the FBI hastily microfiched the serial numbers prior to delivering the money to Cooper.
Bottom line is the FBI had nothing to do with the money until it was handed to them to give to Cooper at the airport. They did not touch the money. They did not put it in the bank bag. They did not microfiche it. They did not bundle it. They didn't count it at the bank. It was put together by bank personnel very, very quickly from a stash of money of $250,000 that they had in the event of a kidnapping, ransom, extortion type thing event that might have happened at the bank. It was sort of a proactive setting aside some ransom money in the event that this bad thing would happen. And they cannibalized that money, hastily counted it, put it in a bag. 2 bank employees and 2 police officers got in a Dodge Dart, drove like bats out of hell to the airport, veering in and out of traffic and driving on the median and et cetera. Arrived at the airport. On the way, they picked up the SeaTac bank manager, a guy by the name of Shoemaker, I believe, and eventually went to Northwest Airlines at the airport and handed the money over. And at that point, the FBI broke open the lead seal, looked inside to make sure that it was actually what it was. Perhaps there was a cursory count, but I doubt it, because the bank would have already done that count. And then it was delivered to Cooper. So the FBI never had anything to do with the counting, collection, gathering of the money in any way, shape, or form. That was completely See First Bank. As far as the microfiche, the serial numbers are microfished, and those numbers were provided to the FBI. And remember, this was a set of money. We just lost Ryan. This was a set of money that was previously set aside prior to NORJAC, prior to November 24th, some undetermined amount of time before this. See First Bank decided, you know what, if we have a situation, we have a bank robbery in the building, they grab one of the tellers, they hold a gun to her head, they throw her in a getaway car as, some kind of insurance. And, or there's a hostage situation inside the bank and we need to negotiate that. We have this money set aside in case of that. And in preparation for that, they had already microfished and recorded the serial numbers and had all of that set aside in advance. So it was the FBI did not microfiche the money. The FBI had nothing to do with the money until it was delivered to the airport, and the money was not hastily microfiched that night. It had been recorded prior to that.
And was he given less than $200,000?
He was not. I spoke with the gentleman who delivered the money to the airport, Bill Grinnell. He was the security officer in charge of the money. Sat in his lap, and he was in the bank vault as it was being counted. And I asked him specifically, did you guys shortchange DB Cooper? And he said, absolutely not. We would have never taken that risk.
No.
Because if we had shortchanged it and he had taken the time to count it and realized we'd shorted him, he could have blown the plane up. He could have carried out his threat. We didn't know. So we did not want to take any risks, and that money was accurately counted. I know there was a gentleman by the name of Lauren Peterson who was I think he was a mechanic at the time. And he has an anecdote in which he described, I think he's actually interviewed by the Washington State Historical Museum, in which he says that the money was actually $250,000. Also not accurate. Cooper was given exactly $200,000 in $20 bills. Now, did he ask for $20 bills?
Stay tuned. I will tease that.
Okay.
That's something I'm working on.
Okay, good.
All
because to my knowledge, he did not. The $20 bills was just the amount that was the denomination that was used for that ransom. So
Pete's guide, was there a die pack in the money? No.
No,
they didn't.
It was taken the way that it works. And I don't want to get in too much into this, but if you went to See First Bank back in the day, they had a huge vault, basically took up an entire floor of this building.
This was the SeaTac corporate office downtown Seattle. Yes.
Giant bank.
Yep.
And this isn't like some, satellite bank on a corner, next to a gas station or something. This was their corporate. So this was a big building. And the basement of this building, basically a full floor, was their vault where they kept millions of dollars. Within this vault was another vault. And then within that vault was a safe in which this ransom money was previously prepared. And they took that money out. It was already organized into, packets. And then you could tell, how, the denomination on the packet. And then you'd grab those packets, bundle them together into 5 packet bundles. And then those big bricks bundles were then put into a See First Bank bag and then crimped with a lead crimper so that it was secured, and then put in the back of a Dodge Dart and raced off to the airport as fast as they could go. Busted. He did not ask for new unmarked bills. In fact, he asked for circulated currency. I'll let Ryan tease the $20 bill request. We'll let that linger. So let's see. Cooper
Wait, hey, hang on. Hang
You
on.
want to add something onto that?
Yes, I'm adding this picture here. This is a photograph from 1970 of the Seafirst Bank building. So if anybody watching, you see this giant building here. It's a skyscraper.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that looks like it's 35 or 40 stories tall.
And the vault would have been in the basement. It would have been
yeah.
underground of that building. Yeah.
Right. It was a Dodge Dart for sure. Let's see. All right, let me get rid of that. All right, so next is
the Cooper. Cooper consulted with the pilot, and they jointly decided to use Victor 23 as their route to Reno. No,
I'll let you have that.
Fake. No, Cooper never used the term Victor 23. Never specified a flight path in any way, shape, or form. He did reject certain cities. I believe he rejected San Francisco as a destination because he said the airport was too large. I think he said the same thing about Los Angeles, although I'm not as sure about that.
Too busy.
Yeah. So eventually they settled on Reno. Now, as it stood, Victor 23 goes as far south as San Diego. So theoretically, had Flight 305 flown Victor 23 the entire distance down, they would have ended up in San Diego.
Sounds like V-23 is basically like an I-5 airway. Like it just goes from Seattle to San Diego.
Right. And it does intersect with, airports along the way. But if you choose not to land at those airports, if you just fly straight down Victor 23, you can go from Seattle to San Diego. Right. straight down to western.
Wendina, I'll add Wendina Ubaz, our Milton Vordal's granddaughter, had an interesting point. She just said that the Seafirst Bank building at the time was the tallest building west of the Mississippi River.
I'll be damned. Didn't know that.
Pretty neat. Yeah.
Thank you. I love trivia like that.
Yeah, that's great.
So no, Cooper never specified a flight path.
I was going to add on to that like this is why we know almost with absolute certainty that Cooper did not have a designated drop zone. It's to the point where he could meet up with somebody.
Yeah,
because there was just no way. He never knew how fast they were going. Even he never even asked how fast they were going.
Right,
ever, not once.
Nope.
He never called forward. Whereas we talked to McCoy was constantly calling up there, asking what the airspeed was. Even McNally sauntered up to the cockpit twice and like peeked in and was like, hey, let me look at your speed and things like this. So, but Cooper didn't care.
Right.
So there was no way for Cooper Cooper's really playing 4D chess. If you're going to say that he created a scenario where they had to use V-23, I don't particularly buy that. It just didn't, that just doesn't, the thing is, there would have been no disadvantage to him to have said fly V-23 because V-23 goes for, 800 miles. And again, It's not about where the plane is. It's when you jump that you're trying to disguise. Like it's like you could say, well, if I'm Cooper and I say fly V-23, well, there's no disadvantage to me for that because it's not like nobody's gonna know where the plane is. Everyone in the country is watching this airplane with radar. They know where the plane is. So what route it's flying on isn't the mystery. You're not trying to
he's flying. He specified originally Mexico City. He's flying south.
Yeah, he's flying south, and that's all he cared about.
Cooper had no idea what a pressure bump was. 99.999% of the American population did not know that a pressure bump meant that you left the aircraft. So Cooper, presumably, his plan was, let me send this aircraft on this flight from Seattle to Mexico City. And then somewhere along the way, probably pretty soon after, I'm going to jump out and the feds are going to have to search the entire Western United States to find out where I landed. I could have landed Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, anywhere along the way. So It just
Could you
happened that
imagine?
they were able to pinpoint it to somewhere between the Lewis and Columbia rivers.
Try to imagine if the pressure bump never happened, how this whole case, all of our discussions would be so different.
Yeah.
Like, and now the Tina Bar money would make us assume that he jumped. I mean, I think that would have informed us that he jumped there,
Right.
or you know, in Washington or somewhere. But if there's no Tina Bar money and if there's no pressure bump, we are so wildly speculating. I mean, like, I can't even imagine. I don't think I could even do this if that was that would be.
It could have been anywhere. Could have been anywhere. So
between Reno
and I saw that Jude said that it was Captain Scott who suggested Reno. It was actually Paul Soderlund. In fact, Soderlund sends the flight range to 305 and basically says, you're not going to make Mexico City. And his exact words were, Reno makes a better choice for a wise hijacker, which I always thought was a funny turn of phrase.
It is a weird, I've never understood what he meant by that.
Yeah.
A wise hijacker. But yeah.
Now, Jude speculates that it was because, I guess, it was closer perhaps to like a FBI headquarters. There would have been more agents. But yeah, it was Paul Soderlund who recommended Reno, which Cooper eventually agreed to, because frankly, Cooper's like, well, I guess there's not a whole lot of difference between, you know, they're going to have to look between Seattle and Reno for me then, not knowing about the pressure bump. So no, busted. Cooper did not consult with the pilot in terms of the flight path, although there were negotiations regarding where, and a little known fact is the plan was for there to be a plane change, that they had briefed United Airlines on Cooper's demands, and that flight 305 would land in Reno, and that Cooper would transfer to United Airlines flight, and the United Airlines flight would then continue on.
Well, it's kind of funny too that if Cooper had been on the plane in Reno when they landed in Reno, they were imploring him to raise the stairs back up, because they said, hey, you're going to damage the stairs when we land, and we can't take back off if the stairs are damaged. Or that's what they were saying. So
right. So, but a lot of people don't know that is that had he really wanted to go to Mexico City, he certainly could have landed in Reno, and this could have involved another airplane and an entirely different crew. So.
And another refueling stop too, because they would have had to have taken a second. I mean, that's how slowed down and bogged down they were in that flight configuration. To get to Mexico, they had to refuel twice.
Yeah.
In Reno and then further south.
Yeah. That's like driving from Seattle to Reno or Seattle to Portland in a Dodge Dart in first gear. You're guzzling gas.
Yeah. It's a great way to put it. Yeah. All right. So the next one is this one is one for you. I'll give you. The air stairs were difficult to raise and lower, and they required specialized training to use.
No, false, busted. In fact, the air stairs were quite easy to deploy. I've been on a 727-100, obviously on the ground, and I've looked in that space that is pictured there on the stairs. I've seen that lever. I've put my hand on that lever, and it is just a simple issue of grabbing the lever, depressing the button with your thumb, and pulling.
That's what
it's probably more complicated to operate a microwave. It is not hard. It is very easy to do, which makes I find it very peculiar that Cooper thought that he needed Tina on board to deploy those air stairs, because he certainly could have done it himself quite easily. And
the copycats did.
Yeah, the fact that he demanded that Tina remain on board to do that, and then, which I think is even more peculiar, is once Tina got a little freaked out about getting sucked out of the aircraft, he was like, "Fine, just go to the cockpit."
Yeah, he never needs her,
and ends up not using her anyways.
Yeah.
So that whole
it makes you wonder if he had a different motive for trying to keep her there. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, though, he could have just said, "You're staying here," instead of saying, "I need you to lower it." I mean, he didn't have to give an excuse,
right?
He could have just said, "You're going to stay with me, hottie."
Maybe he wanted to use her as make people think that he was going to take her with her with the chutes, that she was going to jump with him, so he kind of needed her on the plane to.
Well, he had to have somebody still back there with him until they took off.
Right.
Because if not, he had no hostages because the pilots could have escaped out the front.
Correct. But I don't know if he knew that. I don't know if he knew that the pilots could escape through the front. So, he might have thought they were captives too. I don't know. But at any point, no, the air stairs are quite easy to use, quite easy to
lever,
not complicated, and they are not deployable from the cockpit in a 727-51, which is what Flight 305 was. The pilot cannot lower them from the cockpit. And it seems, and I'll let you elaborate on this a little bit more, it seems that Cooper seemed to think that the pilot could lower the air stairs in the air from the cockpit.
That is that's a real mystery, honestly. It's a real mystery because we just don't know. Because here's the issue: is that Cooper, again, it is the bane of all researchers in the Cooper case that the 302s, that FBI interviews are not recorded. It's a nightmare because these interviews are not recorded. All that happens in these interviews is these agents, they handwrite notes. Okay. When they're interviewing somebody, they handwrite these notes. Okay. And then after they handwrite these notes, they take them to a secretary who then writes up a report based on these notes. So we're really playing this game of telephone. That's really a real pain in the ass.
Right.
When you're trying to get specific quotes.
Right. And we've talked about this, is that the FBI does that purposely because it sucks for us, 50 years hence trying to extrapolate exactly what was said. But for the FBI, when they're trying to interview a suspect, it's to their benefit to be vague. It's their benefit to be able to kind of play around with words, leave things out, add things in, because, ultimately their goal is to try to get, an indictment, a conviction, etc. So I think it was an intentional thing on J. Edgar Hoover's part to have his FBI agents do this, because back in 1971, I mean, even, and I'll let somebody correct me if I'm wrong, even like podunk police departments were using recorded, audio recorded interviews. So the fact that the FBI didn't was an intentional choice on their part.
And so here's what I'm going to illustrate is that, check this out. So one thing that we find interesting is that, remember, these agents, they will handwrite notes from an interview. Okay. They'll handwrite notes. And a lot of times these agents will then, now these 302s, they're called 302s. These reports are written days later, sometimes 5-6 days later. But the agents sometimes will go to a machine and forget what they were exactly called.
Nitel?
What's that?
Nitel?
Yeah, like a Nitel. It's like a fax machine sort of thing. And they would write out a report that would go out immediately after the interview to somebody, right?
Usually DC, right?
DC or Seattle or wherever, and there's differences. So in this one, I'll put up here, we can see from the same day, we've got a 302. We have what's written in an interview with Tina. Days later, from the notes, then we have what they said, in the Nitel thing. Okay, let me put this up. This is really interesting. So this is them discussing about taking off with the air stairs and lowering the air stairs. This is the Nitel. This is the day of, after the interview. She said the pilot told her to tell him that they could not take off with the ladder down, and he muttered, "Yes, you can, but that's all right. We can lower it later." But then, using the notes the guy wrote down days later, Cooper says, she told the hijacker that the plane could not take off with the ladder down, and he said in a low tone, "Yes, they can, but the cockpit can put it down after they get airborne." So those two statements are wildly incongruent. Wildly.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of them shows that this man had no idea about a 727, and the other one leaves it open that he did know. Because anybody who knows anything about a 727 is going to know that the back isn't lowered from the cockpit. Right. But a C-130, though, So
Mhm.
military planes that have ramps in the back
Mhm.
are lowered from the cockpit or can
Mhm.
be lowered from the cockpit.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that might speak to him thinking that it was like thinking that it operated like a C-130. But then on the other hand,
There's no
him
way to
saying,
know. There's just no way to know.
yeah,
I mean,
you
and
know,
it's kind of one of these things where it's like, well, pick which one best fits your suspect, or pick which one best fits your theory on who you think Cooper is. If you think Cooper's a Boeing pilot or employee, then you're gonna pick one. If you're gonna think he's completely inexperienced, you're gonna pick the other. But we just don't know. We just don't know, and that is the Achilles heel of 302s and the way that the FBI documented interviews and the fact that they didn't record them. So
and for people like us who are having to like dissect word for word, every word matters to us.
I am an English teacher by trade. I write. I'm a writer.
I'm a lawyer. Yeah,
Words matter.
dude.
And
I'm a lawyer. I write contracts.
Word choice matters.
Oh yeah.
There are words that mean the same thing, but don't have the same connotation. So, it's when you're trying to sparse words and trying to pick apart exactly what's meant, man, it sucks. It's really, really hard. And you just have to try to avoid confirmation bias, and it's really difficult. So
Pete says, can anyone confirm that the CIA 727s had rear air stairs controls in the cockpit? No, because they didn't have rear stairs at all. The 727s that the CIA used, they had the rear stairs removed, and they had ramps installed that they could push the stuff out of.
Yeah.
I think I've actually got a video here of a cargo kicker. I thought I did. This might be it. Yeah, look here. So there's a video of the ramp. There's a sled right there. You can kind of see it there that they're pushing it. So yeah, the stairs were removed on the CIA 727s.
Yeah.
And they're
and
in
if
their
I'm
guide.
not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the sled test that happened in January of 72 to test to see if the pressure bump was when Cooper left, the Air Force constructed a ramp down the stairs to slide the what's the word I'm looking for? The test subject down the stairs. They didn't slide it down the steps, if I'm not mistaken.
They pushed it off. I mean, they had there's pictures. It's well, no, I guess that they constructed a toboggan sort of like
right.
The way
hence the phrase sled test.
The sled itself was able to slide down the stairs. Yeah, right. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, right. And so, but the ramp could be controlled from the cockpit. No. The
air stairs could not be controlled by the cockpit.
And whatever ramp that they installed on these 727s was not.
It was only controlled by a lever, an easy to use lever in the aft of the aircraft.
Yeah, not the cockpit. No way. And so, all right. So yeah, there's that. All right. What's the next one here?
Oh, preparing to make his unscheduled departure from Flight 305, Cooper carefully scooped up his cigarette butts.
Kofelt. That's a Kofelt myth. Because remember, DB Cooper stuff was hard to come by back in the old days. So we had to kind of have what we had. And Hustler, of all magazines, which
we're not familiar with that magazine, right?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it.
Not familiar.
Interesting. And so Hustler, though, had a huge article about Jack Kofelt that was written in 1980. So a lot of people may have read that and used that. So he says he picks up the cigarette butts, which is funny because of all the controversy. It's like, well, actually, I mean, hell no, he didn't pick up the cigarette butts. So no, that's not even.
We know from the FBI files clearly that the cigarette butts were collected by the FBI, that they were tested for fingerprints and analyzed using the technology that was available at the time, that nothing of evidentiary value was found, and they were instructed to dispose of those cigarette butts.
And they threw them away. Yeah.
Threw them away. So Cooper didn't throw them away. The FBI did. So,
all right. Well, here's one. Cooper gave Tina Mucklow a grin and a salute
as she took one last look at him through the curtain prior to going to the cockpit.
Now, I like this. I'm glad we're talking about this because there's and I guess it comes down to how you feel about Cooper, because I've always seen this as Cooper being this suave, cool, debonair guy that gives her the salute and the grin.
Yeah, right.
You know, he jumps out the back of the aircraft, you know, to the cute girl peeking through the curtain, and he's just like, you know, with his and
see you around, babe.
Yes, see you later. You know, the little kind of cool little gesture, but I'm not sure if there's any evidence for that particular interaction between the Tina and Cooper. Is there?
No, there is. So that only comes from one place. That comes from Tusaw's book. And famously, Tusaw had a interview with Tina Mucklow that was one of the very few interviews she ever gave up to that point. And so presumably, again, with Tusaw was a lawyer. Tusaw was a respectable guy. I just put, as someone who's writing a book on Cooper, I would never, ever in a million years dream of misquoting the people I've talked to, because they're still alive. Well, I mean, I'm not, even if they're dead, I wouldn't do it. But I'm trying to write a real story here. And these are real people who are still alive. Okay. So when Tusaw's book's written, this is in the late 70s or early 80s.
80s, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Tina is very much alive, and they're all very much alive. You know, he's not going to misquote people who are still alive.
Right. And Tina's never come out and said, I never said that. That never happened.
In
fact, Bill Radicek, who was also interviewed extensively by Tusaw, says it's the best book on the case. Yeah. And he publicly and heartily endorses it.
Until he reads mine. So, but no, Bill Radicek, yeah, he endorsed it. Alice Hancock says she endorsed it. Mm-hmm. I know there's things that Alice Hancock has said.
FBI agent. There's no indication that Tusaw was anything other than a man of integrity when it came to the facts of the case.
Oh, look, we nailed it. I mean, look, Bill Mitchell. I asked Bill Mitchell several things from the Tusaw book that are nowhere else except for in that book. And Bill says, "Oh yeah, that's true." And then if the things he's not sure, Bill says, I have no reason not to trust what Mr. Tusaw wrote in that book. And then I know from, there we go. Yes. And yeah. And Bill Radicek holds that little pamphlet. I call it a pamphlet. It's not a very long book. That's me writing in about a 2-day period, coming up with that much stuff. But but no, it's in there.
84, by the way, is when this was published.
84. Okay. So good. I was wondering about that. But no, I know from someone who has talked to Alice Hancock, she has confirmed details from Tusaw. So we have no reason to doubt Tusaw. So Tusaw says that when Cooper sends Tina to the front, Tina turns around one last time as she's closing the curtains, and he waves at her. He waves goodbye to her. I mean, now what that meant could have just been like, see ya, or whatever, but it's cordial.
It also could have been like, get out of here.
That's true. Like, I got to go.
Yeah, get out, go.
Yeah, who knows? But it was a cordial encounter.
Yeah. And
there's no need to ever think that.
But when I hear that anecdote, I think of the Loki Marvel thing where, you know, he's this, you know, gives her a wink and a smile and a salute, and, you know, and I don't know if it was quite that
dramatic.
Way. Yeah.
No, I think it's just like, see ya.
Yeah. It was like, okay, or come on, you know,
bye. So, I mean, or whatever. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
All right. So here is another Uber one. Here's one of the ones with the asterisk. Cooper jumped into a raging thunderstorm with high winds and freezing rain. False.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it was not what I would describe as a raging thunderstorm. The weather was poor. It was inclement. It was rainy. It was cold. But it wasn't the storm of the century.
No, we've got the actual National Weather Service data from the airport at 8 p.m. that night, which says there was triple cloud cover. There was scattered clouds at 1,500 feet, broken clouds at 2,700 feet, overcast at 5,000 feet, 7 miles visibility, light rain showers, 42 degrees, 10-knot wind coming from the west.
Yeah.
That's it. So 42
Right.
degrees. He's not going to freeze to death when he hits the ground. Light rain showers is not a thunderstorm. I mean, it was just the soup is what they called it. It was just Portland weather. It was
correct. Now, I will say that I have spoken with, like, for example, I spoke with Major Thomas Spangler, who was involved in the sled test and construction of the various original drop zones and et cetera, et cetera. And he said that he does remember that night in Seattle being very bad weather. So, and if you look at as the aircraft flew south, as Flight 305 flew south from Seattle, if you look at the radio chatter, particularly as it relates to air traffic control, the aircraft is periodically updating air traffic control on its altitude, its speed, and it is also getting barometric pressure readings for various locations. It's given one for Toledo, it's given one for Portland, et cetera, et cetera. As you watch these barometric pressures, and barometric pressure is indicative of weather. I think it's the higher the barometric pressure, the worse the weather, or vice versa. I don't recall. Either way, if you look at the barometric pressure as the aircraft is traveling south, you can see the weather getting better and better and better. So it appears that perhaps the weather was worse in Seattle than it was in Portland, but it was not a raging thunderstorm. It was not high winds. It was not a blizzard. There wasn't crackling lightning all over the sky.
No, and well, I'll post it here. The Seattle weather is not particularly bad either. We have the Seattle the whole time too. Whereas Seattle at 8:00 says overcast, light rain that began at 7:12. So they took off in some rain.
Yeah.
So when they took off, it was raining.
That's at 8 p.m. though. They'd already been they were in the air for 30 minutes. So, you know, I'd like to see what it was at 7 p.m., 6:30 as they're sitting on the ground. Because remember, we're hearing this from Spangler and others who were in Seattle prior to the plane taking off.
Right.
And this is probably, you know, an unnecessary debate because I think we both agree that the weather was not as poor as it's made out to be. It was not some terrible, violent thunderstorm or storm that he jumped into.
Right. Yeah. I've got it here here's Seattle's. Seattle, it's raining the whole time they're there. So it says light rain showers began at 4:25, ended at 4:43. So actually, they don't land until 5:45. So when they land, light rain showers, it says.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so it was Portland. I mean, is what it is.
Yeah, it was Pacific Northwest weather. It was overcast. It was murky. It was wet. It was, you know, cold, but nothing extreme. It was not an extreme weather event.
No, and honestly, the weather might have helped him in some ways. You know, when you get down to the ground, there's less people around out and about. I mean, I don't know if he thought about that, but I mean, I don't think it was a disadvantage to him to be landing in the rain because less people are going to be outside doing things.
Although I will say, I mean, I've read accounts of people who have gotten hypothermia and died in 60 degree weather. So, you know, I don't think it necessarily has to be freezing and below zero for people to suffer from hypothermia. If you're out in the wet and the cold and the wind is blowing, and it was not warm, it was 42 degrees. And there was appears to be a stiff 10 to 15 mile an hour wind. And remember, when he's jumping out of the aircraft, you know, he's got it's cold. And then you also have, wind chill to think of as he's falling. That wind chill, as somebody who grew up in the mountains in New York in the wintertime, boy, that wind chill will take your breath away. I mean, the wind chill oftentimes is worse than the weather itself. So not to say that it was something extreme that he could not overcome. Sure. I'm just pointing out that
he wasn't going to be in it very long either.
Right. And that leads us to our next one, because it says the temperature outside the aircraft was -7 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -70. And I believe that also comes from Himmelsbach, correct?
Well, and it's not, and that's the thing, is it's not Fahrenheit. It's Celsius,
right?
Which is way worse.
Yes.
So I have this quote here from Himmelsbach. Himmelsbach says, Himmelsbach told a reporter, if Cooper didn't freeze to death on his way down, like what? Hey, that's not even medically possible. He probably died when he hit the ground wearing an extremely fast parachute. So I always have this image of The Shining, of this frozen Cooper who's frozen to death while he's falling to the ground, right? I mean, that's not even literally not possible medically. But no, Himmelsbach loved to say that. Himmelsbach loved to make people go, whoa, when he's like, when he exited that aircraft, it was -7 degrees. And they go, holy shit. And then really it's Celsius, which is 22 degrees. So look, 22 degrees is not comfortable, but it ain't going to kill you. You know, to be in it for a few minutes, you know.
Right. And it certainly wasn't -70 wind chill. I mean, at -35 wind chill, your spit's frozen before it hits the ground.
Oh yeah, no.
That is wicked. And to use Boston terminology, that is wicked cold.
No, and so in World War II, they actually, one of the few things they taught them about parachuting, which was very, very limited, they said, look, make sure, like, they didn't have altimeters, but again, these guys were aviators. They could tell altitude enough from visual, like looking down. If there's no clouds, they can tell kind of what altitude they're at. They would tell them free fall until you're at 5,000, 10,000 feet, because some of these guys, because a bomber in World War II is flying at 30,000 feet, unpressurized, freezing cold, right? I mean, those guys, they're, literally
you see them with those big, heavy,
huge
wool jackets with the collars,
And guess what? Those were plugged into a wall outlet on the plane. They had an insulated. They had a kind of like a electrical blanket. So like they would unplug themselves, but they told them, said, look, do not pull immediately, because if you pull immediately, you're at 30,000 feet. The oxygen's going to suck, for one thing. And it's going to be really freaking cold. So like, make sure if you bail out of your bomber, wait a while. And also, they did get shot at. That is a weird, like, people don't talk about that a lot, but if you actually dive deep into oral histories of pilots, both sides in World War II, they shot the shit out of each other in parachutes because their emotions were up. This guy just tried to kill me. Like, they were just in a zone. And they've actually, something like, I wish I could find the number. There was a video on YouTube that came out recently about that. And the numbers of like people who said they were shot at while in their canopies, it was like 40% that they were shot at by fighter planes flying past them. And those are the ones who survived. I don't know how many were killed that way.
Right.
Basically the longer you would wait to pull your parachute, the less time you were exposed to being shot at.
I have no doubt, personally, that if Cooper survived the jump and he landed feet on the ground,
sure,
that he was shivering cold. He was probably a little bit banged up, and he was probably a little bit disoriented. In terms of, where am I? North, south, east, west, So, but I do think that he was probably teeth chattering cold by the time he hit the ground.
No doubt.
So, but no, myth busted. It was not -7 Fahrenheit. It was not a raging thunderstorm. It was inclement. It was typical inclement Pacific Northwest weather.
We have skyjackers jumping in worse weather. Freaking Richard LaPointe jumped out over northern Colorado wearing cowboy boots, slacks, khakis, and a Western style shirt. He lands in the snow. This guy literally lands in the snow, like wearing nothing, and he's freezing cold. I mean, when they find him, his ankle's broken and he's shivering, but he's alive. Right. The next one here's probably my favorite one that is just irks me to know.
Take it.
The presumed drop zone was remote wilderness with steep mountains far from civilization. Hell no. Like, that is, look, D.B. Cooper jumped into a county with a 1970 census of over 100,000 people. that is not a wilderness. That's not the Yukon. I mean, I know that there are rural places in a county, but it ain't the Yukon.
No.
With 100,000 people living there.
He did not jump into the Cascades.
No.
Where it's, just remote Bigfoot territory. It was a rural county. It was a rural county with a major metropolitan area like Vancouver.
Yep.
Vancouver, Portland. I know Portland isn't considered necessarily part of that county, but you know what I'm getting at.
Sure.
But the outskirts of that county were what would be described as rural small towns, which is the type of area that I grew up in. You have a small town, and then you kind of have houses and roads and things like that on, going through.
Patchy. It's patchy.
Sure.
There's woods.
There's certainly some woods, but it doesn't require you to be a bushwhacker to make your way out to a road.
And the problem is, and so Chris is saying it, Chris is on the thing, is saying it's the wilderness story is FBI propaganda. Not only is propaganda, it's a mistake of the drop zone.
Yeah.
They thought he jumped around the Lewis River area, which is wilderness.
Well, it's a little more wilderness.
It's not really.
But it's certainly not as
Yukon.
it is between Seattle and the Lewis River.
Oh, God, no.
Because in 1970, 71, between Seattle, or let's say Tacoma, and the Lewis River was timber territory.
Yeah.
I mean, Weyerhaeuser was the major timber company in the area, and that was timber area. So yeah, the only things around there was trees and lumber trails. So very, very few towns, very, very few, major roads. So yes, that would have been a terrible place to jump. But from the Lewis River south to the Columbia is not the worst drop zone in the world.
No, not at all. And I mean, it's not the best, but I mean, I tell people Cooper was as likely to land in someone's backyard as he was in a tree, and that's reality.
Yep.
Of where he jumped. So, but this is why I do think Cooper had an idea of where he wanted to jump, because look, it's not a coincidence that he jumps not long after they get past that huge stretch of wilderness. I think he knew that was there. I mean, he clearly knew geography to a point in the area. Yeah. And if you have any understanding of geography, there is a humongous forest down there.
Yeah.
And so I do think he wanted to jump closer to civilization.
Right. That's assuming that he knew where the plane was, because for all he knew, the plane was flying down the Columbia.
Yeah.
Down south, down, past.
And we don't know what he could see. That's
right. So Cooper, to the best of our knowledge, did not know the exact route that the aircraft was taking. So he knew it was going south. And it's not a bad guess thinking that you're going to fly over this wilderness area. But
Chris and I have both talked to pilots, the McClellans, who will say that, in 1970, you could see the lights of Portland and Seattle and Vancouver through the clouds at 10,000 feet. You absolutely could see that.
Right.
So I do think he maybe could have seen that. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but the main thing is that this is a myth that stems from aerial being the main drop zone that the FBI thought about.
Yep.
And camera crews, most of these camera crews weren't there during the 1971 search. Most of the footage we have, interestingly enough, TV shows like to make it out like this footage we have of the search is from like the next day or whatever. Most all of the footage we have of people searching for Cooper is from the March of 72 Army search. Because you see the Army guys walking through the fields. The Army didn't show up till 72. So, but the bottom line is that the Army was camped out by Lake Merwin on aerial. And aerial does have some mountains that are like maybe 4,000 feet. I mean,
and I believe if you look at those FBI reports, the Army, or perhaps it was the agents complaining like, yeah, this brush is really thick.
Oh yeah.
And, there's brambles and brush, and we're really having a hard time like managing getting through.
They said you could walk right over a briefcase and miss it.
So it's definitely wooded. It's not Manhattan.
Especially up there.
But it's a rural, it's a populated rural area. It's got small towns and paved roads and cow pastures and wooded, hills and those types of things. So, but it certainly wasn't the Cascades. No.
So the next one. So yeah, the next
Well,
one.
let's stick with that, because let's hang on a second, because there's also another one that says the original suspected landing zone near Lake Merwin, which is the aerial, FDA's original drop zone, was covered with 5 to 8 feet of ash after the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption.
Yeah, what do you know about that?
No, zero. Not true. Number one, when Mount St. Helens erupted, it did eject an enormous amount of ash and that type of stuff into the atmosphere. However, that drifted northeast, which is in the opposite direction of the drop zone. So of where they believe the drop zone was. So all of that ash and stuff that was projected out of the volcano went miles into the 38,000, 48,000 feet into the sky and was transported in a northeasterly direction. That doesn't mean to say that there wasn't ash in that area, obviously, but it was not 5 to 8 feet of ash that covered that particular area. The vast majority of the ash blew to the northeast.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been enough to cover up things permanently, for sure. We've got Rose Ellis, who's our Portlander. She says she was there. She watched the St. Helens eruption, and they had ash all over Portland.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that there was ash. There was not 5 to 8 feet of ash.
Yeah, she says a half inch maybe. So yeah. Right. When Dina says that, the ash went mostly to Eastern Washington, she says she drove through it on the way to Spokane.
Yes. I think it was Yakima got a bunch of,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Got a bunch of ash, Spokane. So yeah. But
that reservation would have been really bad.
So, but the drop zone was not covered in piles and piles of ash from Mount St. Helens. No.
All right. So the next, Cooper was wearing loafers when he jumped.
Take this one, buddy.
I got this one. All right. So that has its origins in this 1981 AP article. That's the first time that I was able to find the words loafers and Cooper together in the newspapers. Was this 81 AP 10-year anniversary article that was written by some guy. He says Cooper had 2 bourbon and waters or whatever. Not even bourbon, bourbon and waters, has 2 of them. He said he's the guy who says Cooper would jump with loafers. Cooper did not jump with loafers. He jumped, let's see, where is Tina's description here? Tina says he had, on the bottom there, brown ankle-length pebble grain shoes, not tie-type shoes. So she's just saying there weren't laces. But ankle length. Loafers are not ankle length. Loafers are like below ankle length, right? So to me, these sound like those little, I call them beetle boots, sort of these little booties, sort of, and they may have even had a zip on the side that she just didn't see. Those little zip up little, I've seen them listed as British wanker boots, like British wankers would wear, these little boots. Or they could have just been slip-on boots.
I wonder if Jude owns a pair.
I'm sure he is a Irish wanker. So, but no.
Well, I mean, technically he's British.
Northern Irish. He is British. That's true. He's a UK citizen. That's right. So no, Cooper was not wearing loafers. That became a real pervasive FBI thing that they clinged on to. Larry Carr still repeats it, and I wanted to get. Larry said it at CooperCon last year.
I would like to see a picture of what we're actually talking about. Because if they're not loafers, then what?
I looked in the catalog. Maybe I'll be able to find it here, but I looked in a catalog and I was able to find a pretty good representation of what she's describing. Although she called them pebble grain though, which pebble grain is like Oxford shoes, trying to think of it's a type of leather that has the little bumps on them, little raised bumps on them.
Which seems like a very specific detail.
It is. And again, I think that Tina has always had good we can trust Tina on the shoes and the clothes because Tina is looking down. Tina's looking everywhere except at him, according to her. So she's sitting next to this man for 3 hours, yet she's not looking at him because she doesn't want to antagonize him by staring him down, right? So she's looking down probably at it. And so she probably got a pretty good look at his shoes and also his pants. That's how she was able to say that his suit was brown with a thin black stripe, probably because she was looking down at his pants. At least that's what I would think, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, she said that she never even got a look directly in his face. You know,
Yeah.
she said, "Oh, I only saw like a side profile or a, you know."
Here it is. I found here. I'll pull it up. I found these in a catalog they're being sold from an old catalog. These kind of sound like what she's describing a little bit. Let me pull it up. Whoops. Hang on. There we go. Yeah. So these are slip-on ankle length, brown.
Probably about the same color too, right? I mean, they were described as brown, right?
Yeah, it's brown leather, sort of pebble grained. You can see that there's little bumps on them, and they're ankle length, but they're slip-ons. So, how would you describe these? You would say they're, I don't know.
See, I would almost describe those as boots or booties. Yeah.
Which again, we don't know. We can't be sure. But regardless, they weren't loafers.
No.
And I mean, they went up to the ankle, which means they maybe had some support.
Right.
Although again, skydivers will tell you that they jump sometimes in flip flops and things.
Or barefoot.
Barefoot. Yeah. So now again, landing at night, you're going to want some better ankle protection than that.
Right.
For sure. So next.
So busted.
Loafers are busted. Dummy chutes busted. All right. Lake Merwin. I ask you this. The Lake Merwin Dam was brightly lit that night and would have made an ideal landmark for Cooper to make his jump. This comes from the In Search of episode.
And it's fake. I mean, Lake Merwin did not have any exceptional lights that presumably would have been able to see from the sky.
And in your conversation with McClellan, did he describe that to you about the Merwin lights?
Yep.
Yeah, he said you could fly right over Lake Merwin and not see it.
Right. So no, that's busted. He would not be able to use the Lake Merwin Dam as a visual reference from the sky.
No, because they couldn't see it on a clear night. And I just put a picture up here. There's a photograph of Lake Merwin, of the lights on Lake Merwin.
Right.
You're not seeing that from 10,000 feet.
No, not through the clouds.
Not through triple cloud cover as well.
No. So I don't think busted. He's not using Lake Merwin Dam as a visual reference.
And I don't know. And that came from, it's weird because I think where that comes from, I know it comes from In Search of, is when they say that, right? But I think the main thing is that night they were looking for an elderly man.
Yes.
Who had fallen into his boat. He had come up missing, essentially. He had not returned home from fishing.
Right. And
they went looking for him, and they eventually found him clinging on to an overturned canoe or something.
Right.
So there were police out there. And what's a very vortexy thing is that if you actually look at the actual newspaper article about the old man, it says that the sheriff's department received the call at 8:13. We're just like, God almighty. It's like, why does it always do this to us? I mean, that is so vortexy. So, because if those don't know, that's when possibly Cooper. That's when I would say
it's listed on it's listed on the sheriff's notes. There is a news report in which there's a scene in which the shot is taken over the shoulder of the sheriff in Clark County, and it gives basically you can kind of make out 2 pages, and it gives details as far as the weather and the altitude, et cetera, different information. And it says, probable jump time 8:13. And this was, I believe, the day after the jump. How they arrived at that time is anybody's guess, because
it's not listed
the next
anywhere.
day they didn't even know the exact time that he jumped.
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. I've never thought of that. Because because even if they were going off of immediate teletypes, it would have been 8:11. If they were,
and actually, if they were going off of teletypes, it would have been 812 because that's the timestamp on the
you're right.
Oscillation report on the teletype. It was later on that they synced up the time and came up with 811, and that makes sense because there was about a 1 minute delay between the radio communication and the teletype transmission.
Where the hell does 813 come from?
So I don't know where 813
early
comes from,
on,
but it pops up from time to time. In fact, on Dr. Robert Edwards' blog, he does a whole blog post on it and the different times that he was able to find both in FBI files and media reports, and it is all over the place. So, I'm not going to look that up now, but yes, how at midday on November 25th, they arrived at the time of 8:13, and it's appeared in newspaper articles too. How they arrived at 8:13 as the jump time is beyond me. I don't know, and that's the Clark County sheriff. That's not the FBI. So,
right.
And presumably he was receiving that information from the FBI, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's interesting. Yeah. So I just did a search there. So 813 shows up in the FBI files. I mean, again, sometimes it's written weirdly, but 813, I've got 813 showing up, being mentioned by the FBI in the FBI files 10 times. I have 812 showing up 20 times. And let me try 811 and see what pops up there. So 812 shows up 20 times, 813's 10 times, and 811 shows up 14 times. So yeah, we've got a variance there, which is interesting. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So here we go for all the idiots. Cooper could have hid in the cabin and escaped on the tarmac after the FBI left. No, I mean, there's only one feasible place. There are panels that are near the stairs that a human could maybe fit behind, but they'd have to unscrew them because they asked Northwest Airlines. They said, "Hey, can you?" I mean, look, all these things that people say for years. The crew was in on it. He hit on the plane. They were immediately investigating those possibilities immediately. So, like,
of course,
this isn't new.
That's like
not new.
Right. I mean, it's like when there is a murder, who's the first person they look at? The spouse, the significant other. I mean, that's whether that person was in town or not. That's just you're immediately the object of suspicion. So, of course, the first people they looked at was the crew. There were other people besides the crew who saw DB Cooper on the aircraft.
Yeah, and that's the stupid thing. It's like people say it was Radicek. It's like, well, we have audio of Radicek. Literal audio of Radicek during the hijacking. So how could it be Radicek?
Yeah.
He's on the phone.
You can determine how much research someone has put into this case based on their particular theories. And an introductory theory, like if you're a novice, you're like, oh, the crew was in on it. And then we're one step beyond that. Oh, well, he hit on the plane and jumped out when the plane landed, and then after that, it was Richard McCoy. So, you keep, there's like different degrees that can indicate how long you've been researching the case and how seriously you've been researching it. So
and I'll read this for the people who are listening to the podcast. I just put up a FBI file here that says, in regard to the Philadelphia teletype today, which mentioned the possibility of concealment behind inspection panels, Las Vegas advised that both of these panels and the area behind them were inspected while the plane was on the ground. Nothing was found. Remember, people, they were going off, they could not find the bomb. Presumably, or quote bomb. I mean, even again, if there is a 1% chance that a bomb's real, I'm not taking that chance. So anywhere that a bomb could have been stowed in that aircraft was searched because they didn't want to. They didn't want a bomb blowing up on the being hidden if Cooper had hidden a bomb somewhere.
Right, so, and it's important to remember that the plane landed in Reno at 11:02. The crew immediately begins a search of their own.
Against the wishes of the FBI.
Yeah, begins a search of their own. Now they're looking for the bomb, not the hijacker necessarily, but they're looking through that aircraft. 4 different crew members looking under seats, looking in the lavatory, those types of things, obvious places, and found nothing. Yeah. They found no sign of Cooper. And then the FBI brought in dogs to sniff around and see if they could find Cooper. And they found nothing. And then after finding nothing, helped themselves to the crew meals. Right. So yeah, I mean, the idea that he hid on the aircraft beggars the imagination.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
It is a stupid theory. And when people come to me with that theory, I know immediately that they have done zero research into the case, and they are just a brand new casual fan. So of the case.
Okay, next is Tina Mucklow had a breakdown and joined a convent as a result of her experience.
Yeah, I'll let you take that one.
Okay. No, there's nothing to indicate that. Tina was always religious, apparently. Flo roomed with Tina quite a bit. They were on a team of stewardesses. And Tina and Flo had to stay together a lot. And Flo says that Tina was always trying to proselytize to her about her religion. So Tina was always about, preaching. And so for Tina to join a convent, which wasn't really it's not a convent in the way that we would think of it, like nuns wearing nun clothes. It was like a Sisters of the Poor. I mean, Chris, you're a Catholic, right? I mean, I don't know if there's levels of nunneries, but
well, not levels, but there's certainly different orders, and
yeah.
they have different things. What I find humorous is that someone has to have a mental breakdown to become a nun.
Right.
Some people choose consensually and with a full heart to become a Catholic nun. So it doesn't require somebody to have a traumatic experience to join a
and convent. Look at Tina's personality too. We know that Tina has spent her career from the 80s until when she got out of the convent in the late 80s until now, even she still works. She's a social worker. She works at she runs like soup kitchens and things.
Yeah.
So she is a social worker. She's an empathetic person. And let's look at how she behaves on the plane.
Yeah.
She doesn't say, "I'm out of here." She's like, "I will sit with this guy." And she prays for him.
Yeah.
She said she prayed for Cooper.
Bill Radicek gets emotional talking about Tina and her conduct that night. So, and how great she was. He gets choked up and teary-eyed about it. So, he's moved by her.
Tina was very well liked by everyone. No one has ever said a bad thing about Tina. And Tina herself has said that the people who bothered her hurt more than the hijacker.
Sure. The idea that she went into seclusion, whether it be in a convent or later in life where she wasn't answering phone calls, she wasn't doing interviews, et cetera, had less to do with her trauma on the aircraft and, wanted to be, and more to do with the fact that people were freaking bothering her and harassing her, for lack of a better word.
I mean, look, we have FBI files where Tina calls the FBI and says, "Look, some guy called me last night at 3 a.m. and was asking what I was wearing." And I responded, I said, "Pajamas?" And he said, "Take them off."
Oh,
I mean, that's in the FBI files. And so she was getting harassed by some people. But I do love the fact that she even answered the guy instead of just hanging up.
Yeah, in a confused manner. And that shows you, maybe indicates how
nice she was,
innocent she was.
Yeah, she just says pajamas. And so, no, I don't think there's no indication, like none. See, here's another thing too. The fact that Tina never talked about it was used against her to say that she was hiding something.
Yeah.
But honestly, though, we've got FBI files where the FBI tells them, "Hey, look," because they started getting a little, and this is all, I have a whole section in my book about this. Basically, the Bryant Kofelt stuff, this grifter who, they tried to make movies out of him in the late 70s. They offered Tina and Flo $5,000 for 10 days in LA. They're going to fly him out there. They said that Tina and Flo could see residuals in the amount of $30,000, which that's probably that's well over $100,000 today's money, I'm sure, well over. So they were enticing them to do this with this Kofelt story. And what happened is the FBI very cutely says, look, we can't tell you not to enter into a contract with somebody, but if the real DB Cooper learns about anything that is confidential and can use it to his advantage, we will prosecute you criminally for aiding and abetting. So basically the FBI threatened them, not so subtly, and said, look, we can't tell you who to be friends with and who to talk to, but this is an ongoing investigation. This guy is still out there. If you do anything or say anything to anybody and it gets back to him somehow and he can evade us somehow, we will charge you with a crime.
Yeah.
So that to me is why they shut the hell up.
Yeah. And it has always been a point of contention for me. Something that annoys me is that Tina is viewed with suspicion and Cooper is held as this cool anti-hero. That somehow roles got reversed and Tina is the bad guy and Cooper is the cool good guy. And everybody's fanboying for DB Cooper and everybody is castigating and casting suspicion on Tina Mucklow. It is bizarro world.
I think that some of it has to do with, and I hate to say it, but I do think that our mutual friend, Bruce, his book and some of his writings on his website have hurt, because Bruce is the authority on this case.
Yeah.
And his view of Tina is suspicious.
But in defense of Bruce, he's not the only one.
No.
There are other high profile Cooper researchers who also cast aspersions at Tina.
Maybe Blevins, maybe, I think.
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm not going to name names, but
yeah, sure.
There are other high profile people who look at Tina with side eye because of her reticence, and
and her brother-in-law was an FBI agent.
Yeah, so anyways, Tina is not the bad guy here.
No.
Tina is the good guy. She's
Very
the hero of the story. If you're going to point to anybody as a hero, it's her. Cooper's the villain of this tale. So let's just be clear about that.
Okay, so here's one. I'll take this one. Ralph Himmelsbach was the case agent in charge of Norjack. Hells to the no. He wanted to think he was. He takes credit, though. So Himmelsbach, and it may be true, Himmelsbach does take credit for naming the case. He says it was his idea to name it Norjack, and we do know that it did come from the Portland office. Norjack did come from Portland office. That was so. It was a suggestion of theirs, and so it probably did come from Himmelsbach because he was the agent in charge of the case in Portland, but it was a Seattle case. This was not Portland's case. This was a Seattle case. Everything that ever was decided, every decision, the buck stopped in Seattle. It was their case. So Himmelsbach could never just do something. He always had to get approval.
Ryan, let me ask you a question. I'm asking this out of ignorance. The hijacking began in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think that Portland would lead the investigation rather than Seattle, or was it because the actual transfer of the money was done in Seattle?
The extortion happened in Seattle.
Okay.
And that was the bigger.
Portland would be involved in Portland would certainly have a say, and it's not like certainly Portland would have more skin in the game than say Miami or
no. Okay, let me explain. So here's the thing. So think about this: the John Doe indictment came from Portland, right? I mean, that was Himmelsbach's thing, right? The reason is that so the way that federal jurisdiction works is anywhere where the crime takes place can have jurisdiction. So Cooper theoretically could have been tried if he had been caught. He could have been tried in Washington State, Oregon, California, and Nevada, because those were all places where the crime occurred. Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada. So all four of those places had federal jurisdiction. So the federal courts in Nevada could have prosecuted Cooper. And so California, because they technically, the plane passed through California. So anywhere where the crime takes place.
So let me ask you another question. Tina Bar, the money's found in Tina Bar, which is located in Washington. Why was that handled by Himmelsbach, who's in Portland, Oregon?
That's a good question, because Vancouver had a FBI office at the time. When the crime went in 71, Vancouver did not have an FBI office. Okay, the closest one was Longview, which was Tom Manning, and that's why Manning was the guy who did the ground search.
It has always perplexed me.
Yeah,
why Himmelsbach was the one that they went. I mean, I guess it's proximity.
Manpower.
Tina Bar was closer to Portland.
I mean, Vancouver may have deferred to the big brother across the river.
Yeah.
Their office was bigger, and Himmelsbach was a crazy veteran agent.
Yeah. And frankly, I'm confused about how the FBI's chain of command worked in terms of how they were. I mean, this is as you mentioned, a crime in which there's multiple, quote, jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I say this? How they were able to cooperate. In other words, how was Himmelsbach able to just kind of assert himself as the lead guy without repercussion, without DC kind of, backslapping him and saying, no, you mind your P's and Q's and know your role.
It's a good question. I'm actually planning on calling Dorwin Schroeder pretty soon. And, he was there in Portland in 1980. He was actually... he actually probably led the Tina Bar money search more than Himmelsbach did. And I'm going to talk to him about that and say, why were you guys doing it and not Vancouver's office?
Yeah.
Because it was in Washington State. And Dorwin says that the Seattle office was really pissed off because somehow in all of their excitement about finding this money, no one told Seattle. So Seattle, apparently, Ron Nichols, who's the case agent, found out about Tina Bar on TV. See about that. The case agent for this case found out about Tina Bar watching on TV. Like, no one, they just forgot to call him. I mean, he was probably like, what the hell? And so for Ralph liked to think he was the case agent. When I went to Ralph Himmelsbach's grandson's house, you were there too. We went and visited Himmelsbach's grandson, and he actually had mounted on his wall Ralph Himmelsbach's car tag right there. So Ralph Himmelsbach, he says for 1992, Ralph Himmelsbach had a car tag. He had a personalized car tag for Norjack. So Ralph Himmelsbach's car tag, his personalized license plate said Norjack, which I just love that detail. And I remember showing that picture to Larry Carr. Larry Carr was like, "What?" He's like, he wasn't even the case agent. What is his blood in this fight?
So really, like, tell us about Himmelsbach's career. I mean, he's just a special agent, right? I mean, he doesn't have much seniority in 71, does he?
Ralph was never even an ASAC. He was never even assistant.
But he did on the night of the hijacking board a helicopter and attempt to chase the plane. Was that done with the authority of DC and Seattle, or did he just go rogue?
Yeah, he had to be. It was what's his face? The guy in Seattle. So the agents in Seattle were what was it? It was in Portland it was what was his name? Oh, I forget his name. I'm blanking. Crap. Anyway, Bibler. No, Bibler was the ASAC in Seattle. I think Norman Belfry was. Anyway, whatever. But no, Himmelsbach was never actually even second in command, third in command, fourth in command. I think they deferred to him. I think he says it in the book that they deferred to him because he was the only one who had aviation knowledge. I mean, these guys were lawyers and accountants. Himmelsbach was a P-51 fighter pilot shooting down German planes in World War II, and was a private pilot. He owned a plane himself. So I think that they kind of deferred. Oh, I know what it was. I'm an idiot. Duh. Okay. Hijackings were assigned to Himmelsbach. That was part of his job duty. So like the FBI has like 200 of these thingamajigs that I forget what they're called, but crime titles, I guess. I don't know how to say it, but basically they're numbered. And, hijacking was like 116 or something like this, but maybe a 64 hijacking. Yeah. So I'm wrong on that. It's 64 is Portland. Anyway, or maybe it's whatever. I have to edit this out of the podcast. I'm flabbergasted. But anyway, Himmelsbach was assigned hijackings. That is why Himmelsbach was in charge of the Cooper investigation in Portland, because hijackings was part of his duty. He was the duty agent for hijacking. So anyway,
I guess I'm just confused as like, how Portland and Himmelsbach specifically cooperated or didn't cooperate with the guys in Seattle. How many times was Ralph going rogue and just kind of doing his own thing as far as the media without permission? The John Doe indictment kind of just, it would seem to me that, Larry LaCar has been pretty open about the fact that his kind of going public and entering the public eye and doing media and that sort of thing hurt his career. And it surprises me that the same thing did not happen to Ralph Himmelsbach.
Well, they were well aware. They kept track of all the times Himmelsbach went on TV. And in fact, I'm about to pull this document up here. This is an actual document where the FBI were keeping tracks on Agent Himmelsbach's media appearances. They list. So it says here that so Himmelsbach got the John Doe indictment on November 24th, 76. That was when they did it. Himmelsbach immediately does interviews with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 newspapers, 4 TV networks, and that looks like 16 radio stations.
And this is in conjunction with the 5-year anniversary.
With the John Doe indictment, yeah. It says here that Himmelsbach made separate tapes and had separate interviews with the following newspapers, radio stations, and TV stations. So, yeah. So Himmelsbach...
But it seems as if the FBI was aware of it and okay, because otherwise this would be in a confidential personnel file where they're, kind of holding his feet to the fire. They seem to be okay with this.
Yeah. I guess somebody had to do it. So, and he had been doing it. So he was it does seem like Himmelsbach was their media guy.
I'd like to just know myself a little bit more about how Seattle and Portland and DC and Reno cooperated.
I should be finding that stuff out soon. I really do. I think that hopefully when I talk to Ron Nichols, who was the case agent from 77 until 93.
Yeah.
He'll give
the
me
FBI is not an organization that is very loosey-goosey with the rules.
No, hell no. Every time you take a P, they write it down. They're so here's for you. Brian Ingram came across a waterlogged, sand-encrusted satchel containing 294 moldy $20 bills.
No, there was no satchel. Brian Ingram was having a cookout in February of 1980 with his family. His dad said, run on down there and clear a space for a fire. He took his forearm, his arm, and kind of brushed away a few inches of sand and revealed 3 packets of wet, waterlogged money, the very, very deteriorated bills. There was no satchel, there was no container, and there was nothing more that, nothing more than just what he pulled out of the sand at that particular time. But no, there was no satchel, and the amount came up to, I believe, $5,800. Later, I think that was amended to $6,000 based on some serial numbers that
we think that the prevailing thought now is that all the serial numbers have been accounted for.
Yeah, and then it amounts to $6,000 even. So
so it's not like there's missing.
Right.
And again, the real unfortunate thing for us is that we have a good idea of how the money was packaged and given to Cooper, but we're not 100%. We can't say for 100% certainly that was 5 packets.
Well, I think that's the biggest thing. I think we know that they were packaged together.
Yes.
That those 3 packets were rubber banded together. But was it 3 packets that were rubber banded, or was it 5 and 2 were lost?
Yeah.
I think is the question. So,
Yeah.
and I can't answer it. Neither can you. So
No, it sucks.
it sucks, but nothing more was found other than that $6,000.
Yeah. And that goes in the next question. The next myth is that the FBI searched Tina Bar and they found more bills.
No,
They found shards. I mean, they found pieces of bills
but they were never able to connect those to any further serial numbers beyond those 294 or 300.
Bruce likes to talk about a field of shards, but Dorwin Schroeder said that we have from 1980. Dorwin saying that they dug a little deeper into the hole and they found shards in the hole. The money had flaked off, and that's probably the corners were kind of like sheared off somehow.
There's a lot of myths surrounding the Tina Bar money, and I know there's was the money black when it was found, or did it become blackened due to fingerprinting that the FBI did? So there's a lot of questions and myths surrounding it. But what we know is that Brian Ingram, 8 years old, 1980, found 3 packets of $20 bills that were later identified through the serial numbers as part of Cooper's ransom. It was not in any kind of container, satchel, bag, etc.
Do the shards suggest dredge? Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I am not willing to dismiss the dredge theory.
Yeah.
The only thing that is that I question about the dredge is the absence of winter diatoms. It would require that the money was in the water the entire time and then dredged up, and we know that's not possible. And I also find it hard to believe that you would not have silt on those bills if it was.
What time of year was what time of year was the 74 dredge?
I believe it was August.
June? August. Okay, so it's summer. Okay, so
yeah,
I mean, that would have. I mean,
but to be fair, the dredge spoils landed directly on, not directly, but they were on top of the money find. So there were. I did a public records request to the Army Corps of Engineers, who did the dredging. I have the maps, and the money find is underneath one of the areas identified as the location of the dredge spoils. So whether that money was in the dredge spoils or whether it was just further burial is unknown. But the money find spot definitely existed under dredge spoils at some point.
Which suggests that which kind of makes it almost impossible, unless someone really dug deep, that it arrived after 74.
Right. What I think probably, if I had a very, very working theory, is the money arrived there in 72, in the floods somehow. And then later on, I think it's like 2 inches per year is the erosion rate there. So it was, it was buried and then was eroding away. And then the dredge spoils are on top of it. And that further buried it, that allowed it to exist under the sand until 1980. Because I think other than that, it would have been exposed earlier than that. Because 74, I think, was the last dredging that took place.
It was, yeah. So
I tend to think that it was buried and then buried again with the dredge spoils. And that allowed it to eventually, the erosion occurred to a point where Brian could just scrape off a few inches of sand and reveal it.
And I think that we've found out that through somebody, maybe it was you or somebody, found out that the type of dredge, there's 2 dredges. There's like the clam dredge that just like a big thing just grabs mud and just picks it up and puts it on the shore. But then there's like a suction pipe thing, right?
Yeah, I have those documents. I'll have to pull them up at some point and see. I have all of the Army Corps of Engineers documents as it pertains to dredging along the Columbia all the way up until like 1985. So, and it gives everything in detail.
I think they use the pipe dredge, I guess they call it.
Yeah, I've shared those I've shared those publicly if you want to search around for those on various forums and whatnot. And I think that the pipe dredge was 24 inches wide.
Okay.
And I have heard contradictory statements about whether or not it would be able to fit through that pipe and if the money would survive fitting through that pipe. I've heard stories where people have seen tires go into a 24-inch dredge pipe and come out intact.
Huh.
But I've heard other people say absolutely not. It would be torn
Shreds
apart.
of everything. Yeah.
Shreds. So who knows? I don't know.
Vortex, man. All right. We're getting near the end here. Let's see. The FBI has a full DNA profile on DB Cooper.
False. Fake. They do not. They have, as far as we know officially, they have 3 profiles, partial profiles. One is a majority donor, and then 2 minor donors of DNA that were collected from the tie. And I believe that was 2000 or 2001, when the technology was very, very new.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of an actual full DNA profile of DNA of DB Cooper, I almost said DNA Cooper, of DB Cooper.
DNA Cooper.
No, there is no full DNA profile of DB Cooper.
Yeah, I agree. It's two minor contributors, 1 major contributor. Those people are probably FBI agents or somebody else.
Yeah, and their partial profiles and their STRs, which you can't use for forensic genetic genealogy. So that's the DNA that was found on the tie is essentially a dead end.
I don't think anybody whose DNA was tested against Cooper in the early 2000s was Cooper anyway, but those eliminations are not valid eliminations in my opinion.
Yeah. So there's no full DNA profile of DB Cooper.
All right. Let's see. The case has been solved. It was proven to be X.
Yep.
Yeah. No.
Nope. Case is not solved. It's been administratively closed. The FBI is not currently actively investigating it, but nobody knows who DB Cooper was, and the case is not solved in any way, shape, or form.
What's funny is they actually closed the case already in '86. I actually came across an FBI document just the other day that's like, hey, ain't nothing going to happen on this case.
Yeah. And there's a difference between closing it and like just saying like, we're not dedicating any more resources to this.
Yeah. We're not going to have an agent who's just going to sit around waiting for the call.
We're not actively chasing down leads.
Not wasting resources.
Something comes up, somebody brings us a brand new Cooper bill that's not from Tina Barr. Okay, then we'll talk. But we're not going to be actively chasing leads and interviewing suspects and those types of things. So
yeah, they're not brainstorming for leads anymore.
No. But the case is not solved. It's not Richard McCoy. It's not Walter Recca.
Not Kenny Christensen.
Kenny Christensen.
Which was some bogus garbage that.
Yeah, nobody has solved the case.
Yeah, I mean,
not Ted Braden.
Not Ted Braden. They've not.
You might think it's Ted Braden. You might think it's Kenny Christian, but the FBI would not agree with you. The case has not been solved.
Definitely not McCoy. That's for damn sure. No. Okay, and then finally,
the last one. I'm tossing this one to you, Ryan.
Thank you.
The FBI botched this case. They were Keystone cops, or they just didn't put much effort into solving it.
Okay, well, I'll start with the latter, that they didn't put much effort into solving the case. That's bullshit. I've read 40,000 pages of them trying to solve it. Like I often think about this. I try to put it in this perspective. Chris, you and I and Darren and Nikki and Eric and all of us are basically doing what the FBI did in the early 70s, but without the resources of the government, right? To go subpoena people or track people down, whatever like that. They're just men. They're men in their 30s, women even. Obviously, there's female investigators and female FBI agents at the time too. But men and women who are just like us. They're just people who get up in the morning and drive their kids to school. They go into an office and they have a big dump of files in front of them that they have to go through and learn about parachutes, learn about dredges, learn about, drop zones, learn about aviation, learn about 727s. They're just people. Okay. So to say that they did not want, or they didn't put effort into it, why wouldn't they? This was the crime. I mean, we even have an FBI document from 1974 where they're already calling it one of the crimes of the century. So that's the FBI calling it that. So why would an FBI agent, everyone's ambitious, right? Everyone wants a pay raise. Every special agent wants to be a special agent in charge one day or something. Why would they not want to solve it? And you can just listen to Larry Carr himself. Larry Carr's like, this is a case I volunteered for. I wanted it. And I wanted to solve it. I wanted to be that guy. So Charlie Farrell, Don Steele, Ron Nichols, all these guys, John Detler, Dorman Schroeder, Robert Furman, all these guys, they wanted to solve it. To say they didn't want to solve it is ludicrous in the extreme. Okay. And that they didn't put much effort into it is crazy, because they did, man. The legwork these guys did is impressive when you actually read what they were doing. It's very impressive. Then to say that they botched the case, no. I mean, they botched the case when you're Monday morning quarterbacking 50 years later, but that's not fair. That is a fallacy. I don't know what of some sort. Maybe it's, I don't know if there's a name for it, but I would call it the fallacy of presentism, right? We think we're better than those people, because we live now and
Yeah, recency bias.
Recency bias. There you go. They did not botch it. I mean, look, yes, we would know who D.B. Cooper was by now if the cigarettes had not been destroyed. But again, they did not know what DNA was. I liken it to what if 50 years from now there is some way to record the brain waves of a person and read their mind? They didn't record the brain waves of the 9/11 hijackers when they were walking through the airport. No, we didn't know that. They didn't know what DNA. They didn't know that you could get DNA like this. DNA was a thing, and they knew what it was, I guess, but they didn't know you could do it like this. So to say that they botched it because they got rid of the cigarette butts. Now, granted, I can say that yes, generally you're always supposed to preserve evidence, regardless of what it is. But to them, I really think they thought they were going to catch this guy within days, which again, maybe they shouldn't have thought that, but that's what they thought at the time. And all they could think to even infer from cigarette butts was to figure out what brand it was. And they said, hey, we looked at the cigarette butts. They're Raleigh filter tip cigarettes. I mean, that's pretty much it. They losing the hair slide sucks. That's a mistake. That is a mistake they've made. And they should be held accountable for that. That sucks. But botching the case, I would be surprised if they ever actually had D.B. Cooper. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I would say the numbers would say that they never heard D.B. Cooper's name at the FBI's office. Never.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think anybody knows D.B. Cooper's name at this point.
Yeah, and that he was never, the real Cooper was probably never submitted to them.
No.
Because I think that if the real Cooper was submitted, then maybe they could have trapped him up.
I mean, it's similar to the Golden State Killer case. I mean, that guy would just rampaged across California with all kinds of terrible crimes and rapes and murders and, multiple jurisdictions. And, they tried everything to find that guy. And they finally did through genetic genealogy. And he didn't pop up one time. I mean, his name was never even considered as a suspect, even adjacent.
So you're as we wrap up here, you're a Zodiac killer aficionado in some ways. I would ask you, is there like for example, I know that there were officially over 1,000 suspects, yada, yada, yada. Is there anything like that with the Zodiac case where the sheriff's department of San Mateo or whatever said that we've looked at 11 different people or something like that?
It's hard to say. It's very hard to say. I do know that Vallejo Police Department, which is where the murder of not Betty Lou Jensen, Mike Mougeot, and I'm blanking on her name. I apologize. You caught me off guard. But the two young people who were killed at Blue Rock Springs State Park, which is in Vallejo, California, and Vallejo PD handled that up until, I mean, the late 90s. And in fact, the lead detective on that case still believes it's Arthur Lee Allen. And he was the suspect that was the focus of the Zodiac film, the Fincher film back in 2007. So, but in terms of like who they looked at, it's very difficult because many of these jurisdictions, this is still an open case, and those files have not been released. It's kind of like asking that question in 2005
I see.
regarding Cooper.
That makes sense.
Because we don't really know.
You just got rumors of people.
You got rumors, you got retired detectives who've talked, on and off the record, but to put an exact number, but yes, I am sure they have looked at many people. Many.
Darlene was that girl's name, right?
Darlene Farron.
Okay, Darlene.
Darlene Farron and Mike Mucho. Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, Angie says she steps away for 2 seconds, and here we are talking about Arthur Lee Allen all of a sudden. Yeah. Arthur Lee Allen's like the McCoy of Zodiac, right?
Yes. Yeah. Again, it's like, how like you can tell when someone is first introduced to the case by, I think that he hid in the plane and the crew was in on it. I can tell when someone's new to the Zodiac case because they're like, it was Arthur Lee Allen, right?
I saw it in a movie.
Yeah, I saw it in a movie. I read the book by Graysmith. That's right. The guy, right? Why are we even talking about it? Right. So, it just takes a little more research to kind of to flesh it out. So,
okay. Well, look, so we'll wrap this up, and I'll say that I would say that the most, just to wrap it up, just to put a bow on it, the myths that I point to as being the most aggressively spoken of still are the wilderness, the loafers, the dummy chute, and the choice of parachute.
Yeah, and the weather.
And the weather, yes. Those things are real pervasive. And
they were on the Wikipedia page for up until recently.
Until me.
Yeah, up until recently. I mean, even the loafers, I think, were on the Wikipedia page. And yeah, so I mean, and like it or not, the Wikipedia page is where a lot of people begin their journey in the vortex.
That page gets about 500,000 hits a month.
Yeah.
And so it was very hard for me to change that stuff because it was sourced to Larry Carr's article.
Yeah.
Right. And so what better source is there than the FBI agent? Well, I had to go look.
Right.
What's better than the FBI agent?
Wikipedia has a policy, or did, where it had to be a secondary source, that they didn't use primary sources.
Yeah.
Right? So they would not use the FBI files.
I got them to do that though.
Which is,
I know, it's stupid. It is mind blowing. And I raised holy hell. If anybody ever goes to the Wikipedia page and goes to the talk page where people discuss how to change the page, good God. Like I was like, these are the original investigative files. There cannot be anything better than this.
Right.
So we have to use it. And so I was able to finally get the mods and the admins to agree with me because I pointed out other pages. I pointed out how the JFK assassination page uses FBI files. The Che Guevara's page, Martin Luther King's page uses FBI files, and Malcolm X's murder has FOIA files on there. So thankfully, that has been removed.
Right. And I think this is important. I know you were going to do a little video on it, and I look forward to doing that. But this is important because people who are new to the case, it's so easy to get sidetracked with garbage and myths and misinformation, and it wastes so much time going down rabbit holes that are unnecessary and having thoughts and then having to relearn. So I think we covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully we educated some people. A lot of stuff probably people already knew, but maybe we revealed some stuff that people didn't know. And, and all of this is not our opinions. These are
facts.
This is documented facts.
Yeah.
That are debunking these myths. So,
It's good. So, all right, folks. Well, thank you, Chris. And I will talk to y'all again soon. Cheers. Good night. Auf Wiedersehen.
And I'm going to wink and wave like Cooper did.
See you later, toots.